Excellencies, distinguished guests, captains of industry, members of the media, and all of you joining us virtually, it gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome you to the 5th Annual African Business Roundtable, or African Business Forum, brought to you by the UNECA, Google, and also Africa 24. This is an annual flagship event that takes place on the sidelines of the summit of the African Union. And effectively, it's meant to be a dialogue that brings together the private sector and the public sector to talk about the issues that pertain to Africa today and to see how we can accelerate programs that will lead to a collective accomplishment of the goals that we deem fit. These are goals that are well documented and well defined in the African Union's Agenda 2063, and they're also in alignment with the global agenda for the attainment of the UN Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030. Our theme for this 5th African Business Forum is investing in multimodal transport infrastructure and optimize the benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's a focus essentially on transportation, aviation in particular, and the tourism economy, through which there are incredible synergies across the value chain. So let me talk you through some numbers, just by way of describing and explaining why we're here today. How do goods move around the African continent? Well, statistics show that road is king, and that in terms of goods and services, we are looking at a figure of 77% and more of how goods are ferried from one market to another. When it comes to commuters, people going to work, people moving from country to country, road accounts for 90% of how people move across the African continent. Shipping. This is how African minerals and African resources are led to the international market. Shipping constitutes 62% of how goods are moved in the continent and out of the continent. Air travel, although it's glamorized by Nollywood and Hollywood, it only really accounts for about 28% of cargo that moves in and out of the African continent. And then rail, even though we've got about 100,000 kilometers of railway lines, only 1% of goods that move through African markets are moved by train. I'm talking you through these figures because if you look at them, you could say, well, it's an indictment. Rail at 1%, it suggests that we haven't invested in sufficient rail infrastructure or that there isn't maintenance. And that's true. And the conversations we're going to have here today will speak to some of those issues. But if you prefer to look at the glass as half full, then you could say 1%, that gives us almost 90% worth of opportunities to fix African rail, to modernize African rail, and to bring it into international best practice. Our view here today is that the glass is half full, and that the opportunities to optimize transport, the transport sector, and the opportunities within transportation, aviation, rail, and road are immense. We're going to talk you through bankable projects, we're going to talk you through opportunities, and we're going to talk you through innovation, because we believe so much can be unlocked through the sector of the economy, especially as we look towards economic recovery in what we hope will be a post-COVID world into the future. The logistics sector, ladies and gentlemen, is worth over $160 billion in Africa today. And if we make the necessary investments, we could push up demand for freight to 28% within the next 8 years. This is what we're hoping to do through this conversation, is show you the wealth of opportunities and show you what can be done when we invest in the transport sector, when we invest in infrastructure that supports the transport sector, and when we encourage people to visit our magnificent continent and really catalyze transportation through tourism as well. So with those few words, it is me again saying the warmest welcome to the 5th African Business Forum, brought to you by the UNECA, Google, and Africa 24. Please make sure that you post your questions, that we can pose them to our distinguished guests when we're having our conversations. Please enjoy the conference. And again, please see the glass as half full. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our host. She is the UN Under Secretary General and the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Please welcome Dr. Vera Songwe.
Good morning. Thank you everybody for being with us today from across the continent and beyond. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. We are having one of our very rare in-person events, and it's very good to see everybody who is in the room with us today, but many of us still cannot travel, still cannot meet, and many people haven't yet begun to meet together. So let me start by thanking His Excellency, the President of Botswana, President Masisi, who, thank you so much, Mr. President. You have been a faithful presence at the African Business Forum. Thanks for being with us. We are starting slightly behind time because we've been waiting for the President of Sierra Leone, who is on his way here. He's probably having his meetings before he comes there. His Excellency, the President of Niger as well. Thank you very much for being with us. All captains of industry, given the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union, my sister Amani Abuzei, thanks for being with us. All other protocols observed. I'm going to hurry because I know that the President of Botswana has a time constraint and is going to come right after me. So let me just go into the thrust of the matter. Yesterday we were talking about transportation, but we're not really talking about transportation. We're talking about how we revive the African continent, how we build forward, what is it that we need to do. And I'm sure that when we say this, many of us then begin to think, we need to create jobs. Everybody's thinking, are they going to tell us how they create jobs? Yes. What we have seen is that as we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, we have the tendency to just talk about it as something that is going to deliver on trade. I forgot to recognize, of course, the Vice President of the Republic of Gambia, who was supposed to be here, but is now represented by His Excellency, the Minister Tumbera. Thank you so much for being here. I'm just working on the pressure of Botswana. But one of the things that we talk about very often is the service sector. Increasingly, the service sector on the continent contributes over 50% of growth. And this is a sector that is not well understood, not well complemented by resources. But if Africa has to grow and build forward better, we must look at the service sector. When we talk about the service sector, yes, we all know about the banking sector, and there's a sort of quick focus on the banking sector. But there is two sectors that we tend to forget. Tourism, for the countries that are tourism dependent, and of course the Minister of the Gambia, which is why we really wanted the Gambia to be with us, and you will see in a few minutes why the Gambia really summarizes what we're talking about here today. The tourism sector contributes in many cases over 15% of GDP. During the summer months and the winter months in the Gambia, sometimes there is more tourists in Banjul than there are Banjulians. I don't know if that's how we call them. And then on the transport side, we do need people to help us move, as we've spoken. Your Excellency, welcome, and thank you for joining us. We do need people to sort of take the goods around. We talk about the CFTA and the CFTA's potential, but let me just give you a few numbers about why we are talking about this. If we were able to ensure that our transport sector works well, we could create 160 million jobs. And I think if there's a message that we want to take away from here when we talk about what is it that we need to do to create jobs for our youth, how do we revive Africa's economy? I'll come to the billions of dollars. But first of all, let's talk about the jobs that we need to create, because that is how we grow prosperity. People get jobs, people have a constant income, and then we can grow the economies. Now, where will those jobs come from, and what do we need to do? As we know, trade requires, even when you do it on the internet, it requires still that you take a physical commodity from point A to point B. To do that, we need railroads, airlines, and shipping. And when we look at the continent today, we still need 2 million trucks if we were going to be able to generate the kind of ambition that the CFTA is promising, we're in a deficit of 2 million trucks to move goods across the continent. So if you just think about it, and we can see that in many of our ports, the trucks that are waiting either to service one part of our continent or another, this is going to cost $340 million. So there is the investment for the private sector. It's a no-brainer that if we have those kinds of investments, we will get to where we want to go to. On cargo and aircraft, yes, for those of us who live in Ethiopia, when you land, you see, 100 fleets of airplanes, and you think, wow, that's a lot. But we need 3, 4, 5 times of that on this continent for the CFTA to actually work. We need 243 more cargo planes on the continent and $25 billion to actually let the CFTA meet its potential. So again, investments in airlines. Today, when you compare our train and our railways, and there is a lot of discussion, and my sister knows about this standard gauge, normal gauge, how should the trains work, what is the interconnectivity, and the PIDA programs have some of this. We are nowhere near where we need to be if really we want to get intra-Africa trade going. And as we talk about what more we need, we're beginning to understand why intra-Africa trade is not doing so well, because we do not have the infrastructure, even if we have the goods. And it's not uncommon that flowers leave Kenya and go to the Netherlands and then leave the Netherlands back to Gabon. It is happening because we don't have the infrastructure. So we are creating jobs, not that we don't want to create jobs in the Netherlands, but we'd rather create them on the continent. And if we were taking the flowers from Kenya directly into Gabon, essentially all the value add will happen on our continent, and we will be able to create jobs. And this is the virtuous circle. So I have been quoted as saying Africa doesn't need a Marshall Plan because we have the CFTA. This is our plan. This is the plan for recovery. And here we're just talking about the roads and the transport segment of the CFTA. We could talk about the internet segment and what that will do, and of course the healthcare segment. But in our rail and trains, we are only today moving 3% of our goods by rail. We could, with the CFTA, an immediate investment in the sector, $36 billion is what is needed to at least boost that to 6.8%. Europe has 17% of its cargo that is moved by rail across its space. So these are the ambitions that we are looking at. Now, people will say, well, we just need to start somewhere. And what do you do? To upgrade our existing road infrastructure, 600 kilometers of existing road infrastructure that need to be upgraded to move the CFTA to a next level. And these are roads where our small and medium enterprise women are taking food commodities, say from Ghana to Togo to Benin, from Nigeria to Cameroon, from Ethiopia to Kenya. All these border posts where we have a lot of trade and a lot of activity happening usually need some additional investments to make it happen, even as we, of course, are going to be working on ensuring that we have one-stop border shops. And my brother Wamkele Mene from the CFTA Secretariat and all of us are really working on how we then improve on the fiscal and taxation policies. So without further ado, before we give the floor to my sister Mani and then to the president of Botswana, please bear with us for a few minutes. Really, I think what we are talking about here is people usually say 51% of Africa's GDP in the service sector. This is what it is about. It is about all this logistics business and the potential for jobs, the potential to bring ICT into the logistics business, to make it even more profitable for the private sector, but more importantly, for each African to begin to see where the prosperity from the CFTA will come from. So once again, thank you so much. We have done a report on this, which is very extensive about what parts of the continent we need which infrastructure, and we're very happy with all the captains of industry and the private sector and the financial sector for being here with us today, because if we begin to focus on how we finance this, then I'm sure that the promise of the CFTA will more than deliver into the future. So once again, thank you for being here, and we hope that this series on road infrastructure and transport infrastructure and tourism, and in closing, I go back to the Gambia where I started. So the Gambia doesn't have an airline, but the Gambia is one of the countries on the continent that has one of the largest per population, per capita visitor increases. So when we talk about the single African transport market, we need those open skies, because you don't need to have an airline to get people to come and see the treasures that lie across the continent, from Djibouti to Dakar and from Cape to Cairo. There's an amazing amount of artwork, of culture that people can come into the continent to see. But the persistence of wanting to have national flags is actually stopping jobs being created in the tourism sector. And so again, our final plea is to say, can we come together and look at how implementing and ratifying the single African air transport market will really begin to generate jobs for the continent, open up this year, just ending, has been the year of arts and culture for the African Union. But we can't see all the arts and culture that exist on our continent if we do not let transport come in a way that is competitive for those who want to come in. So once again, thank you so much for listening. And I give the floor over to Amani to take over. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. I would first like to start by thanking my dear sister, Dr. Vera Songwe, Executive Director of UNECA, and her team for calling and for organizing this Africa Business Forum on an important theme, which is transport, but with particular focus on aviation and tourism and their implication and connection linkages with the African Free Trade Area. Excellencies, distinguished participants, as we all know, efficient and affordable transport and connectivity are key to the effective operation and success of the African Free Trade Area. However, Africa still lacks in the area of trade competitiveness. Transport costs in Africa are among the highest in the world and harm our continent's productivity and competitiveness on local and international trade markets. High transport costs in Africa are partly due to insufficient, affordable, and reliable transport and logistics services. On average, transport costs in Africa are 63% higher than in developed countries. Transport costs represents between 30% and 50% of the continent's total value of exports, compared to an average of about 17% of the value of exports in other developing countries. For our landlocked countries, transport costs are significantly higher and may constitute about 3/4 of the total value of exports. These costs, as you know, have increased even since the advent of COVID, due to the cost for tests and the different health requirements, which is making transport and travel across the continent even more costly and more difficult, not to mention the complication of unharmonized health protocols across our continent. I also would like to congratulate UNECA and my sister, Dr. Vera Songwe, for the excellent report, which she highlighted in her intervention. I'm not going to go through the different elements she highlighted, but let me focus on aviation in Africa. Aviation, as you know, is a driver for socioeconomic development in our continent. It already supports over $60 billion in other sectors and about 7 million jobs on this continent. African aviation, like in other regions, is important and crucial in the fight against the pandemic, and we've all seen how our carriers have been distributing, emergency and humanitarian supplies, including the vaccines. And having viable and efficient aviation sector is even more important than it has ever been. To promote Africa's physical integration and allow the effective operation of the AFCFTA, we at the AUC have been mobilizing efforts and attention to expedite the development and implementation of efficient and reliable regional and transcontinental transport infrastructure in Africa, mainly through our program for infrastructure development, abbreviated as PIDA. And we have been doing this together with AUDA-NEPAD and the African Development Bank. And I'm sure by the end of this month, on 28th of February in Nairobi, you will all join us to hear more about the PIDA program, the kind of progress that we have made, and also to help us mobilize resources and efforts and catalyze and synergize around this continental program for infrastructure. But of particular importance, like my sister Vera said, is the flagship project of the African Union, which is the Single African Air Transport Market, which was launched in 2018. Its main objective is to create one single air transport market in Africa to liberalize our air transport services and drive economic integration. The SATAM, as it's abbreviated, strongly supports the continental free trade area and free movement of persons by creating more air connections for people, for goods, for services across the continent, reducing the risk and cost associated with intra-regional trade, while opening more trade lanes and opportunities to conduct businesses across the continent. Air transportation is also essential for facilitating free movement, as it can provide better connectivity than other modes of transport, particularly for intra-regional and longer lanes of travel. I'm proud to report that currently 35 African states with a total population of more than 800 million people, accounting for 61% of the population of our African continent and 90% of intra-African air transport market, have joined the Single African Air Transport Market and have opened up their markets to each other. The successful implementation of this Single African Air Transport Market within those 35 member states or African countries will surely encourage the remaining 20 African countries to also join. A recent continental study on the benefits of SATAM, commissioned by AUC and implemented by or undertaken by IATA, has shown that with air transport liberalization, it is forecast that an additional 145 country pairs will receive direct services. The study further found that across the 55 African Union countries, air transport liberalization is projected to result in an additional 600,000 jobs and $4 billion US dollars additional GDP per annum, additional 4 million tourist visits across Africa, an incremental 300,000 jobs in tourism and related industries, and $1.5 billion are expected to be generated in that sector. All of this contribute to increasing direct and indirect jobs, as I said, to the African women and youth particularly. Excellencies, distinguished participants, the importance of tourism industry cannot be underscored. And one of the things I think that was revealed by the COVID pandemic is the importance of tourism and its share in our economies in Africa. It contributes significantly to the socio-economic development of almost all African states. Apart from its overall contribution of over 10% to GDP in our economies, it is a massive creator of jobs and generator of income, especially for women and men and small, micro, medium enterprises. From the taxi driver who takes, the tourist to the airport, to again the taxi driver who drives this tourist back to the airport. It is an incredible employer, and it's also it helps, with the conservation of wildlife, of our tangible and non-tangible heritage, of creating these human ties and promoting our countries. The benefits of tourism, as I said, cannot be, and its share, it cannot be underscored. Over the past years, the African Union Commission, back then I was still also the Commissioner for Tourism, we developed the African Tourism Strategic Framework, and which, together with our partners in the tourism sector, we managed to develop strategies and actions to particularly promote cross-border marketing of tourism packages and the creation of a strong brand Africa of tourism products and services that would sell the continent's tourism industry as a unique package with special value to the world. Excellencies, distinguished participants, the pandemic has seriously affected both our air transport and tourism industries. Very hardly hit. You are all aware that massive losses in revenues were incurred to the entire African aviation value chain, airlines, airports. Same thing could be said about tourism. The pandemic also revealed serious fragility and vulnerabilities and inefficiencies. We need to review those sectors. We need to be more agile, to adapt, to rethink the business models, put in place cost management, and develop new business models, making use of the fantastic opportunity of digitalization, among others, to improve tourist and travel experience, especially in the health, related to health. The pandemic also highlighted the importance of diversification and promotion of our regional and continental supply chains, intra-African trade and intra-African tourism, and the need to urgently to harmonize the health protocols, as I said. Excellencies, I am sure that this fifth business forum to all our partners, the private sector, public sector, to exchange and on the opportunities, on the challenges, on the potential for investment, and to lay a strong foundation, to help us lay strong foundations for the air industry, for the tourism, for recovery, and for a new business model in those industries. I look very much forward to the deliberations, and I once again thank you, Neka, for organizing this high-level forum, and wish you all a fruitful event. Thank you.
We really appreciate your time coming here and sharing your thoughts with us. Your Excellency Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union Commission, and we thank you very much also our host, Dr. Vera Songwe, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the UNECA. Both of these leaders reminded us what matters most. Whatever we talk about here today, it is ultimately about people, it is ultimately about jobs and opportunities. And let's not forget that the people who benefit most are Africa's youth and women as well. So thank you very much for reminding us of those very salient points. Now, the AU Commissioner referenced the costs of moving goods across markets. For an average African country, it's about 33%. But if you're landlocked, those costs could even be higher, simply because you're so far away from the ports and you're so far away also from core markets. And this is an important segue as I introduce our next guest. But I want to start with a little bit of sentimentality. Botswana is a country I know really well because my mother is a Botswana. And we know Botswana as one of Africa's most well-established democracies. We know it as the largest producer and exporter of diamonds. And we know it as a country that has a beautiful topography in the Okavango Delta. So there's a lot to play for in Botswana, from tourism to mining and minerals and culture that was referenced earlier on. But for all of us, in order to savor and experience Botswana, we have to get there. And we shouldn't be getting to Botswana by passing through South Africa or Namibia or Botswana or even London. It should be easier than that. And so freer skies would really create an incredible leverage for an incredible African country. These are issues that President Mokgweetsi Masisi is passionate about, not just to give Botswana great exposure to the world, but to empower Botswana's really talented youth, a country that has an incredible human capital. That is why he joins us today, and it gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome warmly His Excellency Mokgweetsi Masisi, the President of Botswana.
Hello, Lorato. Sorry, I just stepped out for an emergency, but I'm back and delighted to take part. So I have your time. I have time. Please.
Business Forum. I yield the virtual floor to you, Rema Sisi. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Your Excellency, Head of State and Government here present, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and its partners, captains of industry here present, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Allow me from the outset to preface my remarks by thanking the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and its partners for successfully organizing the fifth Africa Business Forum, which is being convened on the margins of the 35th Ordinary Session of the African Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government, as well as applaud them for tremendously promoting entrepreneurship and development in Africa. I am privileged to be part of this important investment promotion initiative geared towards the realization of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. The forum comes at an appropriate time when countries across the globe are struggling to recover from the devastating effects of the global health pandemic occasioned by COVID-19, which has adversely impacted the global economy and people's livelihoods. This forum affords us an opportunity to share experiences and innovative ways of transforming our economies for the betterment of our peoples, countries, regions, and indeed, the global community. The theme of this year's forum is investing in multimodal transport infrastructure to optimize the benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area. A focus on air transport and tourism challenges us to prioritize and devise innovative ways of growing our economies in the midst of the pandemic, particularly in the transport and tourism sectors. Your Excellencies, now bringing the theme closer home, I must hasten to highlight that, like other countries, Botswana's air transportation and tourism industry have suffered over the past 2 years due to travel restrictions brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. This prompted government to put in place a robust economic recovery and transformation plan with the goal of resuscitating the alien sectors, among them the air transport and tourism. In this regard, Botswana recently revised the national tourism policy, which aims at leveraging existing resources to enhance citizen economic participation in lucrative tourism sites in the Okavango Delta, as well as national parks around the country. The revised policy seeks to promote domestic travel and intra-Africa travel through the implementation of key supporting projects, ongoing infrastructure upgrades, alignment to Africa Agenda 2063, and the implementation of an Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Furthermore, Botswana recently partnered with the European Union delegation to Botswana and SADC under the Job Creation Investment Climate in the Eastern and Southern Africa and Indian Ocean Region, EASA-IO program, with the overall objective of promoting full and productive employment as well as decent work. Under the program, one of the priorities is to upgrade the eco-tourism value chains and increase investments, innovation, trade, and sustainable production, as well as consumption patterns. We remain optimistic that at the end of the program, we will have transformed the sector and recovered from the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Botswana Air Transport and Tourism and the AFCTA. Botswana, ladies and gentlemen, is signatory to the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is the world's largest free trade area since the formation of the World Trade Organization, WTO. In this regard, the government of Botswana has embarked on a number of key national projects to upgrade the existing air transport infrastructure to multimodal infrastructure, with a view to enable the air transport and tourism sectors to leverage on the provision and the aspirations of the AFCTA and Agenda 2063. The following notable projects demonstrate Botswana's readiness for uptake of the AFCTA. Total upgrades and expansion of the Gaborone, Francistown, Maun, and Kasane international airports for increased demand for travel, as well as air transportation to support the transport and tourism sectors. The Kazungula Bridge, the majestic Kazungula Bridge, connecting Zambia and Botswana completion. Mohembo Bridge, the Platjan Bridge development projects for improved road and air linkages and travel into and out of Botswana. implementation of the revised tourism policy with the aim of transforming and economy through promoting domestic and foreign direct investment so as to boost the air transport and tourism sectors. The signing of the single African air transport agreement aimed at facilitating the development of a single African air transport market for easier travel around the continent, thus promoting a smooth flow of services, goods, and people in the continent. The implementation of e-visa and the e-passports for efficient cross-border travel, trade, and tourism. Development and implementation of virtual platforms, namely Virtual Botswana Travel and Tourism Expo, launched in December 2020, the Virtual International Tourism Bourse, launched in March 2021, as well as the Botswana Live Virtual Tours campaign, launched in August 2021. The liberalization of air transportation and tourism sectors to allow for private sector in participation and private air charter services. This initiative has indeed attracted a lot of interest and participation from both local and foreign investors. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Botswana aspires to become a regional logistics and tourism hub. Therefore, be rest assured that despite Botswana's relatively limited market size and landlocked position, its central location in SADC presents multiple opportunities for investors seeking to tap into the air transport and tourism sectors in the region because of her strategic location. Furthermore, Botswana's air infrastructure is international civil aviation compliant, less congested, and offers a more competitive fee structure. The country has a capacity to serve as a satellite hub, complementing other regional hubs, and to service niche markets as well as underserviced routes, thus expanding its air freight and air passenger volumes into Africa as a whole. Botswana's growing tourism market will be aligned to growing cargo and logistics capacity and opportunities within the country. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Botswana's innovative intra-regional corridor developments and interconnectivity of road, rail, and air cargo provide a modal platform to access local, regional, and international markets. This is why we continue to promote opportunities in the air transport and tourism sectors by creating a conducive investment environment with the following incentives: no foreign exchange controls, remittances, and full repatriation of profits. So why should you invest in Botswana? Beyond the above cited incentives, as one of the most business-friendly and stable countries in the region, Botswana provides investors with a conducive and welcoming operating environment, a high degree of safety and security, as well as strong focus on the rule of law. To conclude my remarks, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me emphasize that Botswana is on an economic diversification drive that ensures liberalization of air services and deregulation of domestic tourism industry for increased connectivity in air travel, regional and global air links. This will improve competitiveness of locally produced goods and services, as well as facilitate more domestic players, strategic partnerships created with the private sector to enhance the country as a regional air transportation and tourism hub. I look forward to having further engagements with you on Botswana to further explore this great opportunity. I thank you for the promise that lies ahead, and a very good morning.
We're really grateful to you, Your Excellency, for taking time from your busy schedule to join us, to share your insights, and also to tell us how wonderful Botswana is. I've also told them too. Botswana has an enabling business environment. It's open for business. But what we're telling you all here today is Africa is open for business, and certainly in the transport, aviation, tourism sectors as well. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to warmly welcome His Excellency, the President of Sierra Leone, who has joined us. We truly appreciate your being here, sir. I'd also like to acknowledge the participation and the arrival of the President of Afrexim Bank, an important development finance institution and partner in the process of trade and in the building of a lot of trade infrastructure and trade facilitation services. We welcome you, Dr. Oroma. I mentioned that our partners for this year's forum, Google Global, and also Africa 24. I don't have to tell you what Google is. We're probably all using Google right now as I speak. But they are one of the 10 most valuable companies in the world, and they really believe that big data, tech, AI, and a lot of those systems will underpin how you modernize transport and logistic services. And to that end, they want to be part of the solution. They believe that in the work that's being done in Africa, and they support this initiative. And so here is a message from Sundar Pichai, the Global Chief Executive of Google.
To address this business forum on the occasion of the African Union Summit. Thanks to your leadership, the African continent has experienced rapid economic growth despite pressing challenges. It's been especially inspiring to see the role technology has in enabling African-led solutions to African and global problems. Africa is increasingly a place where innovation begins. People all over the world now use mobile payment systems first developed in Kenya. Renewable energy innovations on the continent are shaping a more sustainable future. And the emerging digital technologies in air transport and tourism in Africa that you are discussing here today will improve connectivity on a global scale. Expanding opportunities through technology is deeply personal to me. Growing up in India, every new innovation, from the rotary phone to the refrigerator, improved my family's life. The chance to bring technology to more people is what drew me to Google and to its mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. For 14 years, we've partnered with African governments to deliver on that mission. We opened our first office in Egypt in May 2007, and Google's founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, hired our very first African Googlers. Since then, our presence has grown to include offices in Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, and an AI research lab in Accra, Ghana. Together, we have helped 100 million Africans affordably access the internet, trained 6 million people in digital skills since 2017, and invested in the African startup ecosystem. Across all of these efforts, digital technology has been a powerful engine for progress. That opportunity will only grow. 300 million more people will come online in the next 5 years. Many of them are young, entrepreneurial, and digitally savvy. What's more, the African Continental Free Trade Area will boost intra-African trade and generate investments in infrastructure. Said simply, Africa is on the brink of a digital transformation. Companies like ours can play an important role in partnership with governments, the African Union, and the UN to support digital transformation in Africa. We have focused on the priorities outlined in our Digital Sprinters report, which illustrates how adoption of technology can accelerate economic growth. It starts with expanding affordable and reliable internet access for more people with infrastructure investments such as our Equiano subsea cable. Working with partners like Econet, our Tara team is helping activity to more communities. It uses light to transmit information at super high speeds through the air. We're also investing in startups in areas important to Africa's economy. That includes transport and tourism, the theme of today's forum. For example, we have invested in startups like SafeBoda, an app that connects passengers to a community of safe, trusted drivers through our $50 million Africa Investment Fund. And Send, a logistics platform that helps move cargo across Africa, received equity-free funding from our Black Founders Fund. At the core of all these initiatives is partnership. Success means working in close collaboration with African governments, the AU, the UNECA, and businesses in the digital ecosystem. We are committed to doing just that, to ensure every person in Africa can shape and share in the opportunities technology creates. Thank you.
Yeah, I was about to say yes, he's virtual, but he deserves a round of applause from the room. Thank you very much to the Global Chief Executive Officer, Sundar Pichai, who is the head of Google and Alphabet. Thank you very, very much. Okay, he says Google believes in Africa because Africa is on the precipice of a digital revolution. That is why we're having this conversation, because so much of that innovation is going to manifest in the transport and transport infrastructure space. Opportunities we should leverage. Countries that are ready to take up those opportunities is a country like Sierra Leone. If there's one country that has risen from the ashes like a phoenix to turn its narrative around, to become one of the fastest growing African nations, to really take advantage of its natural endowments, from commercial farms, great agricultural lands, to mining, beautiful beaches that are starting to draw in tourists from across the world, is this country. And my understanding is they're ready to take advantage of everything that is available as a tool to enhance the Sierra Leonean economy, from the launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area to these digital tools, to finding different ways in which to bring people to Sierra Leone and take Sierra Leone's people into the rest of the world. And so please, the warmest welcome to he who will deliver a keynote for us today, His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, the President of Sierra Leone.
Your Excellencies, Dr. Vera Songwe, Mr. Sundar Pichai, the Chief Executive Officer of Google, who just addressed us. Maybe I should use this opportunity to invite you to Sierra Leone, because we are very bullish on digital technology and moving at a very high speed. This is an invitation extended to you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to start off today's statement by commending UNECA for bringing us together here this morning to discuss how we can accelerate our collective effort towards realizing Agenda 2063. No doubt, there is a direct correlation between market and resource accessibility, economic productivity, economic diversification, and job creation on one hand, and a balanced and mutually beneficial regional economic development on the other. The missing centerpiece, however, is a deeper engagement on investment in transportation infrastructure. Economic product. This year's theme, investing in multimodal transport, to emphasize, to optimize the benefits of Africa Continental Free Trade, a focus on air transport and tourism, therefore resonates very well with strategic thinking that informs some of our development plans in Sierra Leone. So this opportunity to share some of my thoughts and listen to all the leaders, policymakers, and experts is truly welcome. Thank you, UNECA, for inviting me to this forum. To my mind, critical to this conversation are two key questions. First, how do we recenter our economic growth strategies and priorities to include the development of transportation infrastructure, which is critical for attracting investment and critical too for trade, sustained growth, and economic development? That is a question we have to answer as accurately as possible. In essence, I assert as a general premise that ships, boats, barges, trains, planes, and automobiles are all central to developing productive sectors of the economy and for supporting economic development overall. The need to overhaul or develop new maritime ports, river and waterways, airports, roads, and railway networks is critical, as has been emphasized earlier. We therefore need financing streams to either revamp existing transportation infrastructure or develop new ones. Secondly, and this one flows from the previous point I made just now, in a COVID era, with reduced passenger and freight flows, shrinking investment capital, and declining world trade volumes, how do we successfully engage private and public sectors and other partners to invest in transportation infrastructure? No doubt, we all agree that we must boost intra-African trade, taking large volumes of investment capital, expand our economic productivity, and participate fully on the global market. Part of why Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is so important to the future of economic prosperity of Africa is that it is the pathway for accelerating shared economic growth and prosperity through greater economic integration. But poor transport infrastructure and the comparatively prohibitive existing cost of transportation to, within, and out of Africa are among major constraints that impede economic productivity and economic integration in Africa. Maritime, air, road freight volumes are lower. This has implications for other sectors of the economy, including manufacturing, mining, agriculture, and tourism. Some of the reasons for the poor transport infrastructure include dwindling public finance investment in transportation infrastructure. As it is, governments are contending with high debt burdens, rising inflation, generally low productivity, etc. This has further worsened with the effect of COVID-19 pandemic on African economies in general. Private capital has been unable to support the wholesome development of transportation infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, how do we go beyond these? It's an imperative because Africa must move forward. First, the ratification and implementation of intra-African agreements that facilitate trade and economic development is important because it improves connectivity and reduces costs. Following the ratification of the African Continental Free Trade, Sierra Leone was one of the first states to take the proactive step of drafting and validating a new national trade strategy developed with the support of UNECA. This was informed by 200 consultations undertaken with various stakeholders in country, from the public sector, private sector associations, development partners, and think tanks. Beyond policy, we are looking for opportunities and possibilities. A key part of our domestication plan included a coordination meeting that helped our partners align their investments and efforts with the activities outlined in the strategies action plan. As a result of implementing the AfCFTA, we are also working with UNECA to update our industrialization policy and strategy on special economic zones in line with expected structural transformation of our economy. For smaller countries like Sierra Leone, integrating with wider market is essential to our economic growth and diversification. It is only by accessing a wider market that our businesses can scale up production and attract investments in diverse sectors. It is only by participating in this larger market that our producers can add value to our raw materials and supply inputs to regional value chains. It is only by implementing the CFTA that our citizens can have access to high quality made in Africa products. Sierra Leone has also committed to the single African air transport market, and we are working with for the full implementation of the Yamoussoukro decision for the liberalization of air transport markets in Africa. We encourage others that have yet to sign to make that commitment to SAATM. Aviation is important to the economy of Sierra Leone because it contributes to GDP, to the GDP, creates jobs, and has knock-on effects for other sectors of the economy. So, although Sierra Leone does not have a national airline, with its membership of the SAATM, it ensures that an eligible African airline is designated to operate routes from Sierra Leone. Additionally, by acceding to bilateral air service agreement, Sierra Leone has adopted liberal principles in negotiating air service agreements with a number of African states by removing restrictions and barriers on capacity, tariffs, and ownership control. In addition, Sierra Leone has ratified the Montreal Convention and such other international commitments as the Cape Town Convention and its protocols. We believe that by making routes predictable, we can improve tourism inflows, passenger volumes, and support the export of perishable goods. Sierra Leone has also grappled head-on with challenges in the aviation industry. We are implementing urgent steps to improve ICAO safety oversight. We can maximize investor awareness of the potential markets we offer by improving data collection and research on air freight volumes and passenger experience. Currently, we are working on with a private Turkish company to improve airport infrastructure at the only international airport in Sierra Leone. We are constructing a modern terminal building with state-of-the-art facilities. Also, part of Sierra Leone's development strategy is to build a bridge from the current airport to the capital. For those who don't understand, our airport is separated by a huge body of water between the city and the airport. Currently, a mix of ferry and private boat move people and goods across. The economic and other benefits of a bridge that joins the two land masses is immense. But there is a struggle mobilizing exclusively private capital to finance such a large venture. This is where we think multilateral institutions like the World Bank can come in with products like to de-risk such large capital investments in transportation infrastructure, thus making them attractive. Additionally, we have in recent years expanded the maritime port at our natural deep sea harbor, rehabilitated and expanded highways leading to Liberia and Guinea borders. These initiatives demonstrate our willingness to invest in multimodal transport and have had the cumulative effect of positioning Sierra Leone favorably for opening up the rural economy and expanding trade. There is scope for more investment and expansion in new ports and possible rail networks to economic centers in the rural areas and into the sub-region. Geographically, Sierra Leone presents the shortest transshipment route to South America, Europe, and North America, 6 hours to all 3 continents. There is also the rich possibility of cooperation with our landlocked neighbors further on to develop transit infrastructure to our natural harbors. Beyond the immediate objective of transiting goods, transnational transportation infrastructure networks and corridors can connect and open up new production centers. The beginnings of a sub-regional infrastructure master plan around energy and ICT have been promising, especially with the operationalization of the Transco CLSG line linking our 4 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to close, but let me say a big thank you to INECA for this invitation and for its continued support to the government and people of Sierra Leone. The opportunities for new transportation sector infrastructure development are many in Sierra Leone. The prospects for making decent returns on investment are huge. The implications for sustainable economic growth, both nationally and across sub-region, are positive. On that note, I thank you for your attention.
I think that was a well-articulated case for Sierra Leone and the linkages of the regional economy. Please, can we give another warm applause to His Excellency, the President of Sierra Leone.
We've taken the view that we have to take a short-term, medium-term, and a long-term approach to resolving the problem, because the trade agreement is now under implementation. So there will be no time to wait for 5 years to build railways and all that. Those investments must go on, and we must plan and do them, but we must make sure we use what we have and grow the air transport. The air transport is one way. Globally, air cargo carries about 35% of trade. But in Africa, in the context of intra-African trade, we don't think it carries up to 3%. But it is the quickest win in our view, because every country on the continent has many airports, more than one airport. So we have at least that infrastructure. Of course, some of the airports need to be upgraded, the runways need to be extended, but the investments to do this are not that much. The biggest constraints we have on the continent, the equipment to carry goods. That is one of the biggest issues. Now, if you want to carry goods by air, I think the study done by the UNECA has shown that we need about almost 250 cargo aircraft. 250 cargo aircraft. I haven't put the figures in it, or you take it to billions of dollars in investment. We've made an estimate, and Boeing has also done, that we need about 160 billion in the next 20 years to be able to get the fleet we need to carry people and goods across the continent. So it tells you where the action has to be. For Afrexim Bank, we believe that the thing to do then is to find a way to provide the funding that will make those things happen, that is, the investments happen. It is easier for many international banks to finance, they provide a senior debt, what we call the aircraft financing. But if you want to buy a new aircraft, you need pre-delivery financing. Pre-delivery financing is normally unsecured. Then you need a junior loan if you're going to take an ECA loan. Those things are not easily accessible. Banks don't give it. So what that means is that you will not get to the stage of senior loan where the international banks can play. So that's why our President Bank decided to go into those difficult areas to support. And we are proud that we really, I think we are the largest aircraft financier on the continent. We've done in the last few years more than $2.8 billion in financing. We did the big refleeting of Kenyan Airways, the 20 aircraft that we bought, we financed them. We did Angola TAG, we financed Ethiopian Airlines here. We financed in Nigeria, we financed Cote d'Ivoire, we advised Senegal. We are literally everywhere, doing new deals with Egypt and so on. But there are other things we also need to do, apart from the financing. If you look at using aircraft, the aircraft to promote tourism, you have to look at other constraints. Airlines, African airlines are owed hundreds of millions of dollars in different African countries because of foreign exchange issues. So that is why we've now decided to integrate the Pan-African payment and settlement system into the ticketing for the airlines. And we are discussing with the airline industry for that. So that somebody in Ghana who wants to buy a ticket from Ethiopian Airlines just pays the city. Ethiopian Airlines will get what they need. So we don't need to then have this backlog of debt in different African countries. What that would then mean is that you immediately see many airlines increasing their destinations because they are no longer going to be wondering what will happen if I go and my money are held up in other places. And we've also seen that although we're doing the pre-delivery financing, doing the junior loan, that will not solve the problem because we also cannot fund everybody because it's not everybody that has the credit to get this loan. So we are working with one of the leading airlines on the continent to put in place an aircraft leasing platform because we want to take away the capital cost of acquiring these new aircraft. We've gone very far in developing that so that we are able to lease those airlines to different aircraft, to different airlines, be them cargo aircraft, passenger aircraft. So that way, we immediately equip those airlines without giving them the debt that they cannot carry. And we are able then to manage the aircraft in a way that we are able to change them as needed, trade them as needed, and bring new aircraft. And we're able to then make it more efficient to use airlines to push into African trade initially before we then go on to see the returns we get in the investments we're making on roads and railways.
Professor Oroma, we'll continue on that tack in a second. And let me just assure Mr. Kilavuka in Nairobi, a lot has been said here and I'd like your views. But before I come to you, I'd just like to get reflections from you, Your Excellency Bio from Sierra Leone. You're hearing what the African Union is saying, what a development finance institution is saying. When you have these conversations and you're sitting in a room with this business, with this DFIs, and you're a policymaker, how do you hope the conversation can be directed in a way that benefits your constituency, the people of Sierra Leone?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I'm happy we are here today to discuss this all-important issue concerning transport infrastructure. For us, I think it is a matter of must. We have to take actions that can solve this situation. And African solutions to the problems of the lack of infrastructure for transportation in Africa must be sought. And therefore, I'm very happy that our brother is here from the bank who has been working. I think, like I said, the investment in these areas, either to build or to repair, is so much. And with the pressures
on government. We just cannot afford this at the moment. With COVID, with debt burdens, which we are all struggling with, low domestic revenue intake as a result of COVID and other issues, we have to have the private sector. But of course, the private sector, again, is going to need help. And that is why we are suggesting that, working with the World Bank to de-risk these sort of financing we really have. It is where I want to commend you, the Afro-Exim Bank, for the efforts that have been made so far. But I think with the gap, the enormity of the gap that we have at the moment, and the need for us to integrate, which is an imperative, we certainly have to think out of the box. And this means that all of us in Africa, especially at the heads of state level, we have to get our heads around the transport issue. It is good to accede to these agreements, and it is another to actually make sure that they are implemented. And I think the Continental Agreement is one that we must act quickly to bring it into fruition, to bring it into action, because we've had a lot of talks about integration, even within West Africa, which is yet to take place. And the continental one is a much bigger one. There are domestic issues. There is need for harmonization, when we talk about policies. And there is a need for us to be frank with ourselves that we cannot afford to be insular or operate in silos and expect that we can benefit from a globalized world. And with digitalization and with what is happening around the world, we need to get integrated very quickly, and we have to pay attention not only to policy but to also actions that can bring our nations together with others so that we can benefit from what is happening around the world.
Thank you, Excellency. So what I'm hearing from you, it's time for action, implementation, and a lot more collaboration. At this juncture, I'd like to just punctuate our conversation because I know, Your Excellency, you've got a really demanding schedule for the rest of the afternoon, and you have requested to take your leave. Just before you leave, sir, if you can just give me one indulgence. I know there's a group photograph that's been requested. Perhaps if you can all stand as the panelists for your group photograph, and then, sir, you can take your leave, and the rest of us will continue with the conversation, if that is all right with you. As he takes his leave, may I ask our remaining panelists for the high-level conversation to take their seats. And what we will do now is begin with commentary from Kenya. I have not forgotten you, Foreign Minister of the Gambia. I want to just give you your own moment to say what it is you need to say. But can I bring into the conversation, joining us, I believe, from Nairobi, virtually, the Chief Executive Officer of Kenyan Airways. As you've heard, Alan Kilavuka, aviation actually becomes the most strategic of the transport modalities that we're talking about here today. Not to say rail is not important, road is not important, but actually in terms of efficiency, it seems as though the airlines could do a lot by ferrying people, tourists, and bringing in cargo. Talk to us about the strategies, if it, strategy is the right word for us to utilize, or the opportunities that airlines can capitalize on with the advent of the African Continental Free Trade Area and the many opportunities for financing and supporting aviation and airports that we've heard about this morning.
Thank you very much, Lerato, and Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My pleasure to really share my thoughts on this very important subject, and also apologize that I was not able to physically be there with you and actually support the aviation and tourism industry that we are talking about this morning. But be that as it may, first of all, to agree completely with the previous speakers and start off by what you just said, which is that aviation is one of the biggest catalysts for economic development, if not the biggest. And the estimates go all the way between 3% to 5% of GDPs in various countries. So an important sector for us, just like you said, because of the speed and the reach of the industry. And we have a second largest continent by landmass, and also second largest by population. So these people, especially with the advent of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we need to move, and also our goods need to move from place to place. And the most efficient way to do it is by aviation. Now, my view is a very strong view about how to move forward from an aviation standpoint when you talk about Africa aviation, which is that I believe that the Africa aviation space is very fragmented. We have over 300 airlines in Africa. Some of them are very small, and we continue to start new ones every day, which is the exact opposite of what is happening in other continents. We also know that if you look at other continents which have a much bigger industry from aviation, they have gone down the exact opposite of fragmentation. They have consolidated the aviation and therefore making their airlines and aviation industry a lot stronger and supporting their own free trade areas. So my strong view is that the future of aviation and the future of airlines in Africa is consolidation. We have to consolidate these markets and make ourselves more formidable, because the nature of the industry is that first of all, it's very complex. It's a very complicated industry. Secondly, it is very expensive, both from a labor and a capital perspective. The margins are very, very thin and very vulnerable to external shocks. Also, you know that we have very skilled manpower, so we need to see how we can share those skilled manpower across a consolidated position. So I also believe that once we consolidate the Africa aviation, it will support not just the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, but actually the actualization of the single Air Africa transport market. So I believe this is critical, this is important. I also believe that the faster we start to talk, which is something that I am personally championing, the better for us. We are losing a lot of time. We don't need to have necessarily airlines in every single country. We can do it the way the other countries have done it. You can have your tail. But definitely when it comes to the unit costs of operating airlines, they need to drop by us partnering and bring them together. Of course, there are other initiatives that will help us also, the policy issues that will help us, infrastructure development of airports, and improvement of those airports, improvement of taxes by reducing taxes, and removing non-tariff barriers across countries, which is what the African Continental Free Trade Area will do. So I do believe that we have an opportunity here, like you rightly said, Lerato. We should look at this as an opportunity to grow our market from only 3% of world travel market to close to what our proportionate size of population is, which is 16%. So if we can move that dial upwards towards 7%, by reducing the heavy barriers of entry and high costs of operating airlines in Africa, and then eventually consolidating this space, I do believe that we as airlines and aviation will play a very central role in supporting the Vision 2063.
All right, we'll come back to you in a second. I also understand that the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission is also pressed for time. So just by way of a final comment, Madame, what are your reflections in terms of the conversations that's been had here so far? Infrastructure needs investing in, aviation needs to be really prioritized or harnessed and enhanced. And I know there's a lot of work that gets done across the board, but from what you've heard here today, what encourages you and what would you like to urge?
Thank you so much for the consideration. Two things. One is the African Union is mostly known for moderating an intergovernmental dialogue around policies. Of course, we have the other voices in the civil society. We have ECOSOC, we have a business forum, but I trust we need to have more engagement and conversation with the actual implementers, which is the private sector on the ground. That is at the continental level, at the regional economic communities level, and also in country. I think that's a key, powerful message. A second one is the role of our financiers. Afreximbank, ADB, we heard from our president in Sierra Leone talking about de-risking. We need also to tap our own financial institutions that are involved in risk managing. We need to tap our pension funds. Yeah. We need to address that issue of rating and around the financial infrastructure or structure on the continent. I think there is a way of actually harnessing more and having a Pan-African structure that is actually backing these investments we are talking about. And this was one of the powerful messages from the summit we just concluded, that we really needed to position ourselves and be strategic around these issues. And UNECA is going to be a thought leader in making that brokering of policies and implementers on the ground for really solutions that work for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you, Your Excellency Monique Nsanzabanganwa, who has been pointing out to us different modalities for financing. And I can assure you, we've got another session in a short while where we're going to really look at some of those technical details. And thank you for your time. I'd like to just say, Honorable Mamadou Tangara, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Gambia, you have to be the most patient man I've met in 2022. And I have to thank you for your grace and for your patience. But in this virtual hybrid world, so many moving parts. So thank you very much for your patience. But I think what I'd like to do now is yield the floor to you. You wanted to tell us a little bit about the story of the Gambia, a country in West Africa. I've been to the Gambia, by the way, I've been to Banjul, and such an incredible coastline, such tourism potential, and you've done all that marketing literally yourselves. I know you've partnered regionally, you've made sure that you use Dakar as an aviation hub, but those tourists just want to come to the Gambia. How did you get it right? And what are some of the best practices and lessons that can be learned by other countries that have this potential for tourism on the African continent?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Your Excellency Vera Songwe, Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the President of Afreximbank, the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. It's a great pleasure to be here to represent my President and the Vice President, who would have loved to stay and participate in this very important forum. Talking about the Gambia, for those who do not know the Gambia, I used to describe it like my face. And the mouth, all the rest is Senegal, and the mouth is the Gambia. It's a tiny Anglophone country within a big Francophone country. And for those who do not know, at some point in history, France wanted to exchange Gambia with Gabon. And the British refused. Then later on, they put Cote d'Ivoire. They still refuse. Because the Gambia has a strategic position, and they all want to be there. And it's also there. Many people who talk about Kunta Kinte not knowing that he's from the Gambia. I met this famous actor, Chris Tucker, and he said he will tell African Americans that if you don't know your history, go and read or watch the movie about Kunta Kinte, but not knowing that Kunta Kinte is actually from the Gambia. I think one of the potential we have as Gambia is the peace and stability that we enjoy in that country. And we touch wood, we've not been affected by any major conflict. And wherever there are conflicts around the region, we have massive influx of refugees who will come, integrate. Some of them will return back, some will stay. So it's a melting pot. And we enjoy also the cohabitation of Islam and Christianity. The country is 90% or more than that Muslim, and you have a Christian minority. But when it's Christmas, you think that the whole country is Christian. When it's Eid, you think also the whole country is Muslim. I guess we like to party, that's why it's like that. And the Gambia became also very prominent in the international arena with our political impasse in 2017, which we managed with a lot of majority without any violence or anything. And just recently also we concluded a very successful and peaceful election with a voter turnout of more than 90% and a campaign which was free of any form of violence. And I think these are all recipes for a very good tourism industry. And we don't have much, we don't have more than the other countries, but I think the peace and the stability and the people are also very nice. We have our infrastructure, we still need to develop it. And we hope that Afri-Exim Bank will come at some point to our support. In fact, my ministry, the one pursuing your accreditation to have diplomatic status in the Gambia. And my permanent secretary is here, she's a legal man, and we are working on that. But I think the main thing that we have in the Gambia is that the people are nice, and there is no secret. You do any kind of study. I met the British Foreign Secretary for Africa and the Commonwealth. He said that he has his friend who came and bought a house in the Gambia because late at night they had a breakdown and they saw people coming. They thought they were going to assault them just because they were there just to help them. And after they wanted to give them something, they refused. There is no secret. I think it's only the fact that we have peace and stability. And that's why that's the sine qua non condition for development.
Right.
And another thing also, we want the investors to come, private sector, but the private sector cannot come when they are not sure about the stability of the country. We offer them tax holidays, but I always say that serious investors will not come for the tax holidays. What they want is the conducive environment, especially the legal framework that will protect their business, that will entice them to come and invest.
There's just one thing before I defer to other members of the panel. I mentioned earlier that when you're coming to the Gambia, most probably you'll fly through Senegal, and then of course you referenced your face as being surrounded by Senegal. Can you talk to us about partnerships? Why partnerships matter? Because, if people can come to the Gambia simply by flying through Dakar and the visa processes are simple, it's those kinds of synergies that make it easy for people to come to the Gambia. And it would be the synergies that can be replicated in other parts of the African continent to just make it easier as well.
But I mean, many people, and especially tourists, are not coming via Dakar. Actually, that's the reality. Most of them will have direct flight to the Gambia. Most of the tourists that we are receiving are coming from the Scandinavian countries, and they will come with chartered flight. And just recently, we are also receiving many tourists from Russia, from the Eastern Bloc, but mainly the tourists are from the Scandinavian countries. And at some point in the Gambia, you even have radio program in Swedish. And from Britain also we have. And with the story of Kunta Kinte also, at some point we had a lot of African Americans coming, and we used to organize the Roots Homecoming Festival, and they will not necessarily go through Dakar.
So we need a private jet, is what you're saying. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Mamadou Tangara. Thank you for sharing the story of the Gambia with us. Just opportunities that exist for tourism and just making it easy to fly around the continent. Alan Kilavuka in Nairobi, I have two questions for you, some that are coming from the floor, but also something that triggered my mind earlier on when you were talking. if you heard the speech of Dr. Vera Sangwe earlier on, she said, let's just get people moving through the African continent. We shouldn't be so obsessed with ideas of national carriers, especially if governments as shareholders can't really maintain the national carrier and bear those risks. There are different ways in which aircraft can be owned, leased, and utilized. Just tell us about not necessarily the experience of KQ, because obviously you've partnered with other international aviation providers, but just what are interesting ownership and equity models that people can look into in order just to grow the sector in general?
Thank you. Loretta, you said two questions. That's one. So let me tackle that one. So when it comes to partnering, consolidation, and models, business models, there are quite a wide range of them. And it's quite the simplest form of which is just interlining, which is just to agree to share a route with another airline, all the way to mergers, where you actually bring airlines together. And the reason why that's important to mention is because depending on the model, then you become more attractive to private equity. I believe the more viable an airline is, the more attractive you are to private equity. Okay. Now, the truth of the matter is that once you engage private equity, it does introduce an element of efficiency within the airline. So it's more important for African aviation to do that. And now, for us to be viable, and I'll go back to my earlier point, for us to be viable, we have to reduce the overall unit cost of operating. So the model that I would definitely therefore say is, how do you increase your scale? You can do it, first of all, by just increasing your capital and inviting people to specific airlines and say, bring capital, $1 billion, invest so that you can buy more aircraft and open up new routes. That's organic growth. That's a more difficult proposition to have, especially at this time. The easier way of doing it is inorganically. So look at airlines where there is synergies between the two of you, then you collaborate and cooperate, either through codeshare, which is a simpler form of it, or actually equity partnership at a level, either at a holding level or different, within the airline. So by doing that, therefore, you increase your scale very quickly and reduce your unit cost overall. And once you reduce your overall costs, you become more attractive to additional capital. You become cheaper, and therefore you can increase your market share. You can support what we're trying to support here, which is Africa travel and of both goods and people. And so it's going to be a symbiotic relationship. You grow because of the model that you're using. More people use you, and you reduce your costs because you're becoming bigger. The problem we have is that the viability of most of the airlines in Africa, they are not huge enough. The scale is very small, and therefore the unit cost is very high, and that is transferred typically to the users. That also doesn't help that we have a particularly higher cost regime from a tax perspective, which also needs the intervention from the states.
There is a question that's coming through for you here, and the question basically reads, let's take intra-African travel of Africans more seriously. So it's not even just trade, but it's Africans traveling from one country to the next, from Ethiopia to the Gambia, to Angola, to Botswana, because Africans do have money to spend as tourists. From your vantage point, what are you seeing by way of African tourism within Africa?
Yeah. So very, very poor. African tourism, intra-Africa travel is way below potential. And let me give you one example. So obviously, you know that Kenya is within the East African community. And within the East African community, supposed to be a free trade area, as it were. But when it comes to air transport, it's not. So the tax that I pay, the passenger service charge that I pay to travel from here to any of the East African countries is the same as the one that I would pay to fly to Europe or the US, which is a big shame. And what does that do? It increases the cost of the air ticket by 30% and discourages the flights, people using air travel from these countries. And instead, what they will do, although they have money, they will prefer to use road transport because rail is non-existent. So it increases the time of travel. And obviously, if they have perishable, for example, they will perish along the way. So I think, if you really think about that, there's a lot of potential for African countries to work together by completely eliminating some of these very unnecessary costs and domesticating air travel as much as possible. We've been talking about the SATAM for a very long time. But how about if we start by, implementing it in bits and pieces using the regional economic blocks and then spread it out? Maybe that would be an easier proposition as opposed to trying to, let's say, have the whole elephant, which is proving to be quite difficult.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I will release you at this juncture, Mr. Alan Kilavuka, the Chief Executive Officer of Kenyan Airways. The remaining questions that are coming through from the conference site are questions that are directed at you, Professor Orama from Afrexim Bank, and perhaps you can share your reflections as well, Honourable Foreign Minister of the Gambia. The question reads, sir, earlier on, Dr. Vera's introduction talked about the need for more than 2 million trucks. What are African countries doing to build roads to support their vehicles? Now, I know that you said that for you at the moment, a priority area is to support aviation and airport infrastructure and the procurement of aircraft. But road is still king, whether we like it or not. Goods are moving across the continent via road, and you need to fix the infrastructure, you need to fix, and you need to make sure that roadworthy trucks are on those roads.
We need to build roads, we need to build railways. We need to have the shipping lines. You have to use the maritime ways to also carry goods and people. What I said was, how do you stage them? Investment in those would take time to yield the results you are looking for. Whereas there are things to do today, and that's why I said the aviation provides you that. However, we need to do the other things. And for Afrexim Bank, infrastructure is not our forte, but we are trying to contribute as much as possible. And let me tell you one of the biggest problems we have in not having enough roads and railways. If you look at our roads and railways as we have them, you have only a few that are done to connect the countries. They are done if you are countries that have the coastline. They go from the hinterland to the up country to the coast. They do not go across to the countries that you have your east or west, depending on, or north or south, depending on where you are in the map of Africa. And that has to do with the colonial history, the way the continent was fragmented, and the way the relations of production were done to only look to the metropolitan powers. So what we need to do now is to change it. But we know from the studies done by different agencies that it will cost about $100 billion per year for 10 years. That's about $1 trillion to build some of those, of course, entire infrastructure, but largely the roads and railways. If you look at the combined annual budget of all the African countries, you will find that what I'm talking about, the cost to do infrastructure will be somewhere about 40% or so of the combined annual budget. What it means then is that you need the private money to go into this. The private money cannot go into this unless it's bankable. So what we need to then make sure that people see that markets exist. People do not know that that people can do business across borders. So you have to do trade information, you have to promote that information all across the continent so that people can see businesses. And when those businesses are seen, you will then see private money also going to support public money. And we begin to now build out the roads and the railways. But the specific things we are doing in terms of what do we need to do today? Take the rail. We have an arrangement whereby we support rail projects that some countries are doing to connect them, to make it more efficient to ship goods from one country, which is, say, landlocked, to another country that is by the coast, but through the most efficient route. We also discussing with the Angolans, for example, to do a railway that will get to Kasumbalesa and also be able to link to the railway that goes from Zambia to the Indian Ocean. So that will then link the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean, and so on and so forth. So the people who are asking the questions are right. We need to do those investments. However, we need to see how to do what we have to do today to make sure that goods begin to move, so that we begin to create the businesses that will make private money to also go into the other investments that will take a longer time to implement. Thank you.
Just before I hand over to the Minister, obviously big infrastructure is something that happens at a sovereign level. And that's where we've also seen a lot of these PPEs and the parent and syndicated loans and complicated finance, the stuff that you're very good at. But at a business to business level, if somebody is running a medium-sized enterprise, a logistics company, a trucking business, and just wants to know what is a bankable project where they can get a loan from the bank and they can use some of the trade facilitation support that comes through from an Afrexim bank, what would you consider to be the kind of business that can really unlock good potential at a B2B level that would interest you?
Well, that is normal thing we do every day. We finance people who do trucks, logistics, overall logistics, not only the trucking, but also the warehouses that are needed and are required as we move goods across borders. We have just started piloting the Pan-African Collaborative Transit Guarantee Scheme for the continent, piloting it in the commercial region. Today, if you want to move across borders by road, you carry goods. Each time you have to post a transit bond. So if you cross 4 countries, 4 borders, you post those bonds as you go. Sometimes they are cash collateralized, very inefficient. So what we've done now is work with the African Union to develop a collaborative transit guarantee scheme, which will be one guarantee scheme that once you take it, you can then cross all those borders. You don't need to wait. You don't need to stay. So that is also making it easier and better and more efficient for people who are doing trucking business to do them profitably. So those are facilitative. But financing the trucks, the fleet of trucks, warehouses, we do them every day. Another thing we've just started doing, there are a number of companies that are doing using e-logistics. One of them is called Kobo 360, which has about 500 trucks that operate all across the continent. Our fund, the Fund for Export Development in Africa, has invested in it. It has also started working with them to see how they will integrate with another entity that does the same thing in North Africa, so that together we will have one e-logistic company that is able to do the trucking using technology literally all across the continent. That e-logistics platform is going to be connected into the platform we are building under the African Trade Gateway, and then also then open it to the Pan-African payment and settlement system so that insurance can be bought using the payment system, so that people can pay for the service without having to look for foreign currency to do so. So all of these are things we are doing to make businesses in trucking across borders more profitable, more banking. And we believe that with time, over time, we'll begin to see the results in terms of the volumes of cargo that are carried by these trucks.
This is just so encouraging what you're saying. And if I just was to sum it up, I just think you are really putting your money where your mouth is. Thank you very much. Okay, and a final comment, please, from the Honorable Mamadou Tangara. We heard His Excellency, the President of Sierra Leone, speaking earlier on about much more work that's needed at a regional integration level in West Africa. I think he even used the word, it's almost non-existent in terms of the potential that can be maximized for seamless trade in the ECOWAS region and, you know, working with other regional blocs as well. From your perspective, what are the kinds of things that leaders could be doing in your region to support local businesses in the Gambia, to support the tourism economy in the Gambia, and make sure that you're all really singing from the same hymn sheet, holding hands, so that you all win, so that the region wins as a whole?
Very much. See, I sincerely believe that if we want to move and leapfrog, we have first and foremost occupied the driver's seat. That's a fundamental thing. And if we are confined in this blind nationalism, even the Africa free trade area that we are talking about will just be wishful dreams. We have signed all these agreements, but when it comes to the movement of goods and people, we face huge challenges because of the road network and some of our national policies. The Gambia at some point was also basing its economy on re-export trade. And we know all the challenges that our people used to encounter because of the bad road network. And some of them were deliberate. For example, I will take the example of the Senegambia Bridge. We've been talking about that for many years. It's only under the leadership of President Adama Barrow and Macky Sall that we were able to translate it into concrete reality. And we've seen the economic benefit of that bridge. People are moving smoothly. And if you go on both sides, road infrastructures are being improved. Not the second category kinds of road, feeder roads that they will come and build for us and leave. But they are just for some time. And that brings to my mind thinking of Gandhi when he was building road and people are saying, well, you're building a lot of roads. He said, let's build the roads and the roads will connect us. And I think in Africa, what we need today is practical intelligence. Know where our priorities are and not allow others to do the programming for us. I was at some point working for the European Union. And I know that for the programming exercise of the National Indicative Program and the RIP, the Regional Indicative Program, we rely on technical experts from Europe to come and do the programming for us. And they will set the priorities for us. And during one of our information seminar, where we invited all the stakeholders to avoid duplication of action, one old man who took the floor and said that, I'm happy to be invited here. And he said in our language, when you translate it, it will be like the proof of the pudding is in the eating. He said, you come with your project. You go with your project, but our problems are still the same. That to say that the bottom-up approach that you are talking is not being implemented, it's top-down. And then once you do that, there is no sense of ownership also. But I think the fundamental question is for our leaders to understand that our destinies are inextricably linked. I cannot understand when you have border closures between some of our countries and we are still talking about free movement of people and goods. And these are political decisions that have to be taken at the highest level in the supreme interest of the people of the sub-region and the region in general.
You've been very candid and we really appreciate that. But you do come from a truly beautiful country and hopefully we'll all be able to visit soon because Afrexim Bank will have funded the airline that gets us there. So gentlemen, I'll leave you to converse privately as you've requested. And I want to just thank you very much for taking the time to be with us as we begin very important discussions at this 5th African Business Forum brought to you by the UNECA. Thank you very much, Honorable Mamadou Tangara, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Gambia. And thanks to you, Professor Benedict Orama, the President of Afrexim Bank. And we also thank the Honorable Deputy Chairperson of the African Union who was with us, Dr. Vera Songwe, and of course, His Excellency, President Bio of Sierra Leone. It's been a wonderful morning of conversation. We are going to continue talking, let me assure you, in the room and those virtually. I know that some of you send your questions. They're quite technical. They need a little bit more business savvy, and our next panel will be able to address many of your questions. I will pose them on your behalf. But for now, let me ask our esteemed guests to take their leave, and may I ask that we acknowledge them with our thanks.
Sanbonani from Johannesburg, and welcome to Google for Africa. My name is Nitin Gajria, Managing Director for Google in Africa. Google is invested in building out our global infrastructure to help bring everyone online. This includes Equitiano, a state-of-the-art subsea cable that will connect Africa with Europe. We're already making tremendous progress on the construction of branches landing in Nigeria, Namibia, St. Helena, and South Africa. Our partnership with UNDP empowered 25,000 students and 800 teachers across 20 schools with access to Google Workspace for education, training, devices, and full Wi-Fi access. Now, to tell you more, it is my honor to welcome our CEO of Google and Alphabet, Sundar Pichai. Welcome, Sundar.
Thanks, Nitin, for that introduction and for all you do for Google Africa. A big focus has been expanding opportunity through digital skills. In 2017, we committed to help 10 million Africans get the skills they need to grow their careers and businesses. And so far, we have trained 6 million people. We know there's more we can do to bring the benefits of technology to more Africans. So today, I'm excited to announce that we plan to invest $1 billion in Africa over 5 years. It'll cover a range of initiatives from improving connectivity to investing in startups. We have so much opportunity ahead as Africans shape the next wave of innovation. Thank you for the chance to be a part of it.
Greetings to everyone watching this Google for Africa event today from all across Africa and the world. I am honored to address you on this occasion. I've been informed that Google has helped close to 500,000 African businesses get online and reach new customers. They have provided online resources to millions of businesses across the continent to help them manage through the uncertainty of the pandemic. We need to get back on our normal lives and therefore stay masked and take the vaccine. Thank you all.
that we're ready to continue with the remainder of our program. And let me again remind those who've joined us virtually that you are watching virtually the 5th African Business Forum, brought to you by the UNECA, Africa 24, and Google Africa, supporting the industries, the ideas that will move Africa forward. A lot has been said today about the different modalities of transport that can unlock growth in Africa. We've spoken a little bit about rail, definitely about roads, but a special focus on aviation. And the reason is because it is through aviation that we can also see a synergistic, a symbiotic growth and opportunity for tourism, because it is these airlines that will bring in foreign visitors to African shores. And it is also through aviation that we can see a lot more cargo goods moving through the African continent in support of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we are really punching at different areas, trying to get a win across different segments of the economy, the tourism economy, the transport economy, and ultimately generating growth and development for the African continent. Just by way of numbers, because numbers don't lie, when we get the transport sector right and unlock the potential in transportation and logistics, it could add 7% to general economic activity or GDP on the African continent. 7% is not a small number. Currently, air transportation supports 7 million jobs across the aviation sector. That's everything from pilots to stewards and stewardesses on the airlines, to catering services, maintenance and engineering of aircraft. 7 million jobs come from the aviation sector. Prior to COVID, so before COVID-19, the African continent saw on average 76 million visitors coming to our shores. 76 million. If we get aviation right, as has been said, with the right investments, the right procurement of aircraft, and just supporting the hospitality industry, we could see the number of visitors to the African continent jump up from 76 million to 303 million in the next 10 years. We are gunning for that 303 million number because so many more jobs will be supported across the value chain. So now, as we discuss the investment opportunities, and we also talk about optimization and efficiencies that will lead to growth, I'd like to introduce to you our panel. Most of them are coming to us virtually, as this is a hybrid forum, and we're still living in a world where we need to social distance and keep safe. So if you can just pay attention to your screens, for those of you in the room and for those of you online, as we welcome His Excellency Albert Muchanga, the Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining at the African Union. He will address us first, and thereafter we will yield the virtual floor to Abdurrahman Bert, who is the Secretary General for the African Airlines Association, also coming virtually. Yassin Fall, who's the Acting Vice President at the African Development Bank, working a lot on issues of hard and industrial infrastructure. Salim Bora, who is the chairperson of the Suma International Construction Group. They've built many airlines in West Africa, airports in West Africa, also coming to us virtually. Angeline Semana is the Interim Secretary General of the African Civil Aviation Commission, also coming to us virtually. Ms. Beatrice Chetor, who's of the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area. They're based in Accra, Ghana, and she'll be joining us virtually. We'll also have Hani Abdelkawi, the Head of Travel Sales and International Growth at Google Global, so Head of Travel Sales and International Growth. So for all those who've got your questions around how to get more visitors into Africa and how to pay seamlessly and make it easy, this one's for you. Ato Diasi is from the Africa Finance Corporation, also virtually. And then last but certainly not least, we have from the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, Sidi Ould Tar, who also share with us a perspective from the financing side as well. So without further ado, over to you, Your Excellency Albert Muchanga, Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade and Industry and Mining at the African Union. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremony. I'd like to thank the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Dr. Vera Songwe, for inviting me to participate in this business forum. And my participation consolidates the positive relationship that is growing between the two institutions at the level of the Department of Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining. And in fact, the department now has a new name after the summit yesterday approved the naming of the department to mainstream tourism. It's now going to be called Department of Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry and Minerals. In that way, we will not lose sight of the need to develop the tourism sector as soon as possible. I'll begin by saying that Africa is a continent of more than 30 million square miles, kilometers actually, not miles. And it spans 6 time zones. That's how huge a continent is. And this large continent has 55 members of the African Union. And all these 55 members participated in the negotiation of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. So far, 54 have signed the agreement. And over time, we expect all the 55 African Union member states to sign and ratify the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. This is unique in the sense that if you compare to the European Union, not all countries of Europe are member states of the European Union. But in the case of Africa, we are headed towards universal membership across the African continent. Although Africa has a large landmass, she's also fragmented. In this state of fragmentation, there are very limited transport, communication, tourism, and energy interlinkages among regions and the countries. The establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area, with a vision of creating one African market, is the first step towards defragmentation. A key element of this defragmentation is the establishment of inter-country and inter-regional linkages to facilitate cost-effective transportation of goods and people across the continent. The African Development Bank estimates an annual infrastructure deficit of between 130 billion to 107 billion United States dollars. Closing this gap is an investment challenge that the members of this high-level panel should address. Beyond investment in transportation links, we also require investments in freight, warehousing, and distribution across Africa to ensure the operation of efficient and reliable supply chains. Cheap and reliable air transport is key to the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Our business people need to rapidly move high-value but low-volume goods like jewelry across a market of 1.3 billion people, which is estimated to be 1.5 billion in 2025 and 1.7 billion people in 2030. In the earlier discussion, Mr. Alan Kilavuka, the Chief Executive Officer of Kenyan Airlines, called for the creation of Air Africa. It's a message I've brought forward in my engagements across Africa to advocate for deeper continental economic integration. So as you deliberate in this high-level panel, I hope these are some of the issues that you need to raise. A time should come when we should have an air transport network which is able to cover all the capitals of the African Union member states cost effectively, so that the business people can really move about and do their business in a very competitive manner. And I look forward to this high-level panel to come forward with options for increasing investments in the air transport sector. I yield the floor and thank you very much for your kind attention.
We appreciate the insights you've shared and also for setting the tone for us, Your Excellency Albert Muchanga, Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining at the African Union. You've also posed to the floor some pertinent questions that I think can be answered adequately. We'll start with you, Abdurrahman Bert, who is the Secretary General for the African Airlines Association. A lot of things have been said about the investment potential that exists within the aviation sector, within airline infrastructure, from the procurement of aircraft to the refurbishment of airports. So a lot that can happen in this sector of the economy. But amongst our delegates, there is Adinkie Olwenge, who says, you know, the costs in terms of air tickets, the costs in terms of freight charges, just don't make aviation a viable strategy, whether you are a traveler or whether you're a business that is moving goods across the African continent. It's just one of those prohibitive things. So I'd like you to share your thoughts on the aviation sector and answer this question from Olwenge. What are we going to do about freighting costs and airline tickets? Because that would be where the stimulus begins.
Thank you, moderator. A greeting to all participants. I would like, first of all, to commend UNICA for organizing this forum, and I am happy to be part of this very important panel. As it was said by many people before me, aviation represents a great contribution to African economies, more than 60 billion contribution to GDPs and more than 7 million jobs. And the potential for growth is very high. And I would like to talk about some issues which for me are very important. The first one will respond to the question raised. This is sustainability. For many years, we have been talking about air transport sustainability. And you can realize in Africa, the number of airlines which are created and in the end, which will go out of business. Sustainability is a reality. At AFRA, we think that we need to address this issue with a multi-stakeholders approach because unfavorable business environment is impacting the three sectors: trade, tourism, and air transport. The challenge is how to set prices at an affordable level for African middle-class citizens and how to make the environment more sustainable for industry players like airlines. For that reason, AFRA has resolved and is supported by many other stakeholders to organize a workshop on sustainability of air transport. This workshop will happen soon. We are in the phase of preparation. The objectives is to put all stakeholders together and to think out of the box to find workable solutions to address the sustainability issue. The second concern for me is about financing requirements to sustain the growth of our industry, because the need for financings are very, very high. Financing of infrastructure, meaning airports, and also cargo facilities like warehouses. We have seen during the COVID-19, for example, the growth of cargo activities by 33% from before the COVID-19 to end of 2021. And also, airlines need financing for their aircraft. It can be leasing facilities or buying new aeroplanes also. Another area which needs financing is to build human resources. Because, of course, this growth trend of aviation will need a lot of training across all the sectors. So development and financial institutions have to play an essential role in financing requirements. The next concern for me is policy requirements. We need to put in place a policy environment which will sustain the growth of air transport. The African Union Free Flagship projects in this sense are very important and interdependent and should be implemented as soon as possible.
Right.
Regarding the single African air transport market, we have so far 35 states which have committed to it. We need to make sure they will start implementing it. This project will enhance connectivity intra-Africa and also expand the market, air transport market share. We need to work hand in hand the SATAM and African Continental Free Trade Area stakeholders. And also regarding policies, we talked about cargo development. We need also to adapt regulations and policies regarding cargo customs in African states to better facilitate the development of this sector. Another requirement goes to airlines. Airlines really need to rethink their business and enhance cooperation. Mr. Alan Kelavoka, CEO of Kenyan Airways, talked before me about kind of consolidation. This is very important. It goes from interlining, code share, or equity partnership. We really need to support our members for that. And to end my contribution, I will say that at AFRA, our role is to support our member airlines and also to put on the table some new projects which can sustain the air transport industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your interventions. And I guess from what you've said, the important terminology here is sustainability. Whatever you do, make sure it is long-term, long-haul investing, and it keeps the jobs moving in that sector of the economy. The chairperson, or the commissioner rather, for Economic Development, Trade and Industry at the African Union has just thrown a spanner in the works and said, we really have to think in a measured way about how to support and build the infrastructure that supports aviation, from warehousing to the cargo depots, fuel depots. those sorts of things. Ports, in the case of shipping, making sure that where the goods land are properly stored, they're safe, they're secure, and they can move onwards to the market. And so with that, I'd like to bring Selim Bora, the chairman of the Suma International Construction Group, into the conversation, because the Suma Group has been involved in the construction of airports in a country like Senegal, the support of building industrial processing zones, warehousing, hangars, and the like. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do, the investments that you've made, and why the point made by the AU Commissioner is very important, but how to fund it. It's one thing to talk about it, but how to generate the revenue and, or rather the resources to make these warehousing, port and freight facilities viable.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, distinguished guests and audience. Allow me to start with some congratulations remark, especially for President Macky Sall, who took over the African Union presidency this year. I want to congratulate him for this new mandate, and as well as the Senegalese national football team for their extraordinary becoming champion of the continent. So we were very excited to watch these, as we feel ourselves already half Turkish, half African. So again, hello from Istanbul. Our company is a construction company mainly, but as well as an investment company. And recently we have done important contribution in the airport business, especially in Senegal, as well as in Niger, Niamey International Airport, which we have built and we are still operating. We see a big future in the aviation business, and as President Matabio said, our company is also involved in the development of Lungi Airport reconstruction and the investment. Private companies like ours who do fast-track design build work around the continent brings a big positive impact on the economy of those countries. First of all, our speed of delivery is extraordinarily fast. Duration of construction is within a year, 11 months, maximum 14 months period. And turnkey delivery of such projects, mega projects in such a short time has a very important impact in terms of confidence to the leadership and the stakeholders. On the other hand, it brings a big ecosystem. As an airport is a very organic, live structure which works every day. And around the airport, because we have an undisputed territory, fenced, and regarding the ownership, there are no issues. It belongs to the state. Therefore, you can actually develop the land with a real estate developer perspective, where you can build an aero city, you can build offices in the same territory, you can build commercial retail areas, you can build cargo village, you can build an academy, you can build a solar energy system which will not only give the enough power to the daily consumption of the airport, but also excess energy to the surrounding neighborhoods. So it's a whole ecosystem. I think airports in Africa have very big future. But when it comes to financing, traditional financing, unfortunately, is very slow in terms of considering an application, making sure that it's delivered on time. From that perspective, we found incredibly challenging, especially when we consider the speed of our delivery. It's just not matching. So I think banks like Afrexim Bank, Badea Bank, who are very flexible in their fields, as well as like Trade Development Bank. So banks who know the African continent reality, I think should start looking at tokenization of the infrastructure projects through their platforms. When we are entering an extraordinarily new era of technology with blockchain systems, smart contracts, I think our partners like Afrexim and others should also get into this new era and help us with getting quick access to fundings through the tokenization of infrastructure, which I am a true believer. So with these remarks, I think I should pass the floor back to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your contributions there, Salim Bora, Chairman of the SUMA International Construction Group, reminding us that it's an ecosystem. You don't just procure an aircraft. You've got to think about the broader economy that can be yielded by that aircraft, or the economic activity that can be brought about by just that one aircraft in an airport, within the services that are being provided there, from the fueling to the catering, to whatever other industrial zone that can be linked to the airport. So thank you very much. And I hope that answers part of your question that you posed earlier on, Honorable Albert Mochanga. Financing is being flagged up again as a real impediment to completing projects or getting them done on time. So with that, I'd like to bring in the Acting Vice President of the African Development Bank Group, Madam Yassine Fall. The AFDB supports the aviation industry big time. To use a colloquial term, you have supported many national airlines, helping them build capacities. Obviously, you are a huge investor in hard infrastructure across the African continent, roads, energy. It's one of your 5 strategic priorities. But the issue here is how to unlock and deploy more capital that will stimulate this transport and logistics sector for growth, for the kinds of numbers we've been talking about all morning, and also for commercializing businesses, as Afrexim Bank spoke about earlier on.
Good morning, and good morning. Allow me, Lerato, to recognize the previous high-level panel, including heads of state, senior government officials, and private partners. And I would also like to thank the United Nations Economic Commission on Africa and my sister Vera Sangwe, as well as the African Union Commission, including the Deputy Chairperson, Monique, and my sister Amani Abu Zaid. Yes, the African Development Bank is definitely very much concerned and involved in developing a strong African aviation and tourism industries, first in relation to its strategic development priorities for the continent, the high five. I don't know. I'm sure everybody knows what it is at this time, and also the importance of the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that is now that will require to finance an expected increase of 28% of intra-African trade, but also ensuring by 2030, but most importantly, to ensure that our continent generates the number of jobs that our young population requires. And therefore, the African Development Bank is obviously involved in providing financing solutions to develop those sectors. And most recently, with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had significant setbacks in terms of the cost that it has entailed for the aviation industry, 50 billion, which is estimated of 50 billion US dollars, and an estimated loss of 20 million direct or indirect jobs. The African Development Bank over the last 10 years, and most of the projects that have been mentioned in this discussion today, not only on the airline and air transport sector, but also multimodal sector, which is the theme of this discussion today. I'm going to quote the Kazungula Bridge, the Senegambia Bridge, as well, and I will come to direct financing concerning the air transport infrastructure and aircraft purchase that we have been discussing. Our approach is to, on the upstream, support establishing and supporting a strategic framework and a range of instruments in support of continental initiatives regarding the sector, but also providing downstream support in ensuring and securing private sector, as well as public sector investment to modernize infrastructure in support of transport and tourism. In providing upstream transport, the African Development Bank provides and is involved in establishing a policy framework and leveraging on financial instruments and solutions to enhance the development of, to accelerate the development of the transport sector, and taking into account the importance of ensuring a sustainable development and sustainable growth of the transport and tourism sectors on the continent. Ensuring that we leverage on private investment using existing platforms to convene and ensure that there is a financial and technical response to the requirement of developing the sector. And that involved the Africa Investment Forum that has been created by the African Development Bank Group and other partners, including Afrexim, TDB, and other partners since 2018, but also very specific instruments and platforms to boost both industries. Also promoting specific de-risking instruments that obviously addresses the limited capacity to finance the industry, and that is to de-risk the cost, of financing and de-risking the investments that are required in the sector. I also like to mention the importance of in supporting the development of a single African air transport market that, of course, is necessary to ensure that, in particular, the African Continental Free Trade area allows a significant increase in trade, but also in movement of African people. The bank has provided specific support to, especially to the development of improving the air transport sector in several regions in Africa, but more specifically, boosting institutional capacity or to oversee civil aviation safety and security, as well as the capacity and modernizing the air transport equipment and infrastructure. And on the downstream, let me mention the importance of sustaining the modernization of major aviation infrastructure. The African Development Bank, supported the development of Dakar International Airport, Blaisdell Airport, as well as the connected other transport, including railway transport, in supporting the Dakar Regional Express train that connects the city of Dakar and the new airport. Also several terminals, including Accra Kotoka International, or supporting the investment that African airlines such as Ethiopian Airlines or Air Cote d'Ivoire modernization has required. Investing, just to close, the tourism is definitely an area where major investment will be necessary, and specifically in the sense that job creation and development of SMEs will require such investment to ensure that our development strategies and objectives will be met. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Madam Yassine Fall, speaking through the broad spectrum of investments that have been made by the African Development Bank in this area of multimodal transportation infrastructure, but also talking us through the importance of looking at different financial instruments to utilize in investments, blended financing, something that comes up. And I think that's a good place to bring in Ato Giassi from the Africa Finance Corporation, also a development finance institution. And a point was raised earlier on, Ato Giassi, that, are we doing enough to look at different areas from which we can source capital? Are we looking at deploying pension funds in Africa? Are we going back to the capital markets? Can we pair the risks? And then, of course, a question also came through from our delegates. It's a question from Hawaiiya, who says, are African countries putting in place sufficient legal safety nets for a unified legal system to enable infrastructure to be developed through public-private partnerships? So as we're looking to find the money, deploy the capital, are we creating a proper legal regimen that applies country by country for sound public-private partnerships? If you can help us with that from the Africa Finance Corporation.
Thanks, Lerato, and hello to all the colleagues, everyone dialing in. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. So maybe very quickly on AFC, for those of you who do not know us, AFC is a Pan-African multilateral that focuses really purely on infrastructure financing across Africa. So we look at about 6 sectors. So this is natural resources, which is oil and gas and mining. We look at transportation and logistics, obviously a topic for today. But we also cover power, heavy industries, telecommunications, and increasingly we are looking at healthcare. Of course, the COVID pandemic has taught us all a lot, as well as technology more broadly. We're very pleased to say AFC is the second highest rated institution in Africa. We are rated A3 by Moody's, which we are incredibly proud of. And AFC has been really active in Africa. So over the last 10 years or so, we invested over $8.5 billion across 35 African countries or so. So I'm trying to respond, I suppose, directly to your first question around sources of capital. I think one thing that I always say, and I suspect a lot of people have always heard, is there actually is a lot of capital available for projects in Africa. The challenge we find is this whole issue of bankability. And I know you asked the question of Dr. Rama earlier on, and what does it mean? Again, something that's been discussed, fairly at length. So I think in addition to the normal products, I think that most providers give out there, which is your senior debt, your trade finance, and your mezzanine. The space that AFC spends a lot of time in is project development. And this is really the effort and the funding required to take the project really from an idea past the bankable feasibility studies to actually getting the work done to getting the project up. So that has to do with things like permitting, detailed analysis, pulling together the whole advisory system, and all the partners involved in it. And we've actually really had a really good track record in this space. I mean, I'll give you an example that we are particularly proud of, which is the Arise Special Economic Zone in Gabon. So those of you who know Gabon may note that it's always been very heavily oil dependent as the oil resources are coming down, they're transitioning the economy. And Gabon is blessed with a very good forestry sector. But most of this was not being processed. So, I mean, AFC, or maybe to put a little bit more detail, and a lot of they were selling, for want of a better word, at about 30 euros per square meter. We believe that for Africa to work and grow, there's got to be ecosystems. It's a word that's been used earlier today. We've got to see the linkages and be able to apply those linkages to creating value. Again, everything we discussed here cannot be done in isolation. If you go back into history and you look at the key hubs we have in Africa today, a lot of them have colonial ties or ties to things like mining companies. So in order to bring this all together, we've got to look at linkages. So in Gabon, what we did is develop a mineral port. We just developed a general port, a whole railway network, and a beneficiation system for the forestry products, such that purely because of beneficiation, Gabon is now able to get close to 180 euros per square meter versus the 30 it was already doing. And in fact, in certain instances, as much as 40,000. And this is purely about beneficiation. This is purely about linkages. This is purely about infrastructure. So we see that as really key for Africa. We need more partners, and they're prepared to develop the development, take the development risk, and pull these together. Once you get the development out of the way, again, my sense is there is a lot more capital available, whether that be project equity or senior debt. It tends to be more available. Touching briefly on the second question, which speaks to legal network. We speak about Africa. It's again very dangerous to speak about Africa as it was one country, because it's not. You certainly have certain jurisdictions that have very developed legal frameworks, and you have some that are not so well developed. I would say from an AFC perspective, one of the things we're really proud of is Zafida. So this is a body that we were part of setting up that seeks to pull these things together. So it goes about, it does a lot of public service, a lot of education, predominantly to the public sector, but I also say to the private sector. We're trying to do a lot to standardize documentation. So, I spoke earlier about project development, and one of the things that is really difficult, costs a lot, takes a lot of time, is pretty much every deal Africa does, we treat as a new deal. We just don't replicate, or we tend to not replicate and scale up. Something we spend a lot of time trying to do and replicate. And you find that in jurisdictions that get this right, you see the scale up. So if I digress for a second to the power sector, for example, in Ghana, we were very proud to be part of SunPower, which is one of the first IPPs that happened in the market. And you suddenly saw a ramp up in that because there was more understanding, there was more standardization of the documents, and that goes through. So again, it's not a question one can answer generically, but we are seeing improvement across the various African countries.
Right. Absolutely, and I think standardization of rules is something that the African Continental Free Trade Area, it's the bedrock of the work that's being done by the Secretariat. And I know that on things like local content, on the manufacturer side, they've made significant headway. I want to stay with the money before I bring in the speakers from Ghana and the CTFTA, and invite you from the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, Chepelaya Kabata. Let's stay with the money. But the question here is, the question coming through from our delegates, how do we fast track trans-African infrastructure when we know that some countries do not have the capacity and the resources to construct their sections of the various infrastructure? So you want to see bridges crossing over one country to the next. One country can complete the bridge, the other can't. It's got too much debt. So how do we support those countries so that we do get, functioning, streamlined, cross-boundary infrastructure without delays?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. And first and foremost, I would like to apologize in the name of the Director General, Dr. Sidi Unta, Director General of Badea, who charged me actually to fill in for him, and he would like to apologize to Dr. Vera Songwe, the Executive Secretary of ECA. I want to also take this opportunity to actually pass his regard to all the distinguished panelists today. So with respect to the question of how Badea does when it comes to finance infrastructure projects from the countries, connecting different countries, first of all, I would like to emphasize on the fact that over the last 45 years, infrastructure financing has been the hallmark for Badea. And Badea financed more than 200 roads across the continent. And most of these infrastructure actually benefited countries with no access to the sea. Landlocked countries benefit from this investment. So I will point out a couple of examples where Badea, being cognizant of some hurdles between government, how do you get those governments to get along to have a transnational infrastructure, for instance? One of the successful stories actually will be the roads linking Benin and Togo on the Mono River. So the two countries actually were able to come along with the support of Badea and other financiers to erect the bridge linking those two countries. So obviously, when you are dealing with more than one country, you may run into difficulties of harmonization, regulation, and also the level of debt from one country might be an impediment for a common project. But Badea actually strongly encourage government to get along on transnational and regional projects. So in that respect, I will point out to one of the initiatives financed by Badea in the Sahel region. Back in time, Badea financed a feasibility study to establish a Sahel Airlines to actually connect all the Sahel country with one airline. So this is one of an example where if the country have a hard time development financial institution like Badea can actually do the first step, feasibility study, and assist this government to come up with a more bankable project to promote regional integration. Another example I will point out in terms of how you get two different countries to get along is the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which offers actually a great opportunity to push the continental flag program like PIDA, the program for infrastructure development in Africa. So in that respect, we at Badea are very cognizant to the fact that when it comes to actually fill the gap, a huge one around the continent, the willingness of government is one thing, but the capacity, financial capacity, or the competence is another factor. So to lay the first stone to promote such infrastructures, our institution is willing to step in, not only with feasibility study, and also to even mobilize more resources, our own as the one from our partners. I mean, I will point out more specifically to the Arab Coordination Group, as well as to other development bank. I will point out to African Development Bank, Afrexim, TDB, and others, with whom we've worked for quite a long time to finance common projects of regional integration impact across the continent.
Thank you so much for your interventions and for reminding us that you can't achieve this without multilateral cooperation across regions and across various development finance institutions. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I think I'm going to go back now to the topic of why aviation matters, why aviation is regarded as one of the most strategic of the various transport modes that we've been talking about this morning. Angeline Simana, over to you. You're the Interim Secretary General of the African Civil Aviation Commission. Now, I would say to you, so many protocols, so many commitments. There's been the Yamoussoukro Declaration. There's been talk on freer skies. And about 3 years ago was the commitment around the single African air transport market. When do we stop talking, start implementing, move beyond commitments into action? And where do we stand right now on creating freer skies on the African continent?
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for having me. And let me use this opportunity also to thank UNEC for organizing this wonderful opportunity for all of us to interact and speak to each other about issues of mutual concerns that we all are empowered in one way or another to do something about it. Now, where are we? Why so many talks throughout the past decades, and what did we achieve? I believe, Madam, we have made in many ways remarkable progress. Taking back with a quick glance at 1988, it must have been very difficult for those ministers of transport from the 40 states that met in Yamoussoukro to discuss the problems that they saw and that the opportunities that they realized was only possible through talking to each other, as well as creating cooperation among themselves for us to be able to use the transformational benefits that we all know can only come from aviation to improve the social fabric of Africans at all levels. Now, earlier on, the Commissioner for Infrastructure and now enumerated the benefits that comes with civil aviation, and particularly reflecting on the benefits that were revealed by the recent study that the AUC has had commissioned through IATA. Now, to first introduce, it's important to see what are we and why are these trade agreements governments can pursue more aggressively and create an open and enabling infrastructure for airlines to take advantage of, or industry in general. Why it is so important for us as an agency. We are an agency, a specialized agency of the African Union, responsible for civil aviation matters on the continent. A safe and secure, efficient aviation industry is of paramount, as has been enumerated by everybody that spoke before me, and even the high table earlier on. For the strategic importance of Africa to reposition itself differently. Africa supports a range of businesses, or aviation can support a range of businesses, trade, tourism, cultural, and social activities which will significantly contribute to the prosperity, to its prosperity, as well as at national, regional, and at continent-wide level. Now, the African Civil Aviation was in 2007 and trusted with the responsibility as the executing agency for YD and the operationalization and implementation of the single African air transport market. Now, if we go backward, looking at how difficult it was for those ministers to meet, I think, and you all would agree, that it is much easier for ministers, this generation of air transport ministers, to meet and to discuss issues of mutual progress, of mutual importance to them. But we are obviously patently aware of the many opportunities that we have missed. 1998, when they met again in 1999, they realized that very little was achieved. We are better connected, but not as we should be, given the opportunities that we have as states as well as a continent. Now, this has been revealed in the recent IATA study that was carried up on behalf of AUC, which substantiates the idea that the full implementation of YD would lead to substantial benefits in Africa, or in the aviation sector, and the sectors beyond it. The study has projected that intra-Africa traffic volumes will increase by 51%, and our countries in the African Union are expected to experience that growth. Study further that average fares are projected to decline by 26%, providing fare savings for 1.6 billion per annum, while connectivity and travel convenience are expected to improve, with additional 145 city pairs receiving direct services and frequencies on the existing routes, increasing by 27%. But the study revealed another concern that has not been the focus for a long time, because it was assumed states are very generous when it comes to the basic air traffic rights, which is the third and fourth. Unlike we thought, what the ministers were preoccupied was back in 1998, back in 1999, 2000, and this generation of aviation professionals is really that to provide beyond services to enable airlines to be able to move and to build the yields that are necessary. Now, this study revealed that there is a very low level of BASA compliance between YD states, because all of them, with the exception of Mauritius and a few, are YD states. They subscribe to the YD policy. Then we have the 35 that have now subscribed to be part of the single African air transport market. Now, from this study, it is clear that there are only 4 states with a very high level of YD compliance when it comes to their bilateral air services agreement. These countries are Liberia, Cape Verde, Mozambique, Senegal, and Mali. Now, I believe to pause here, these are states with aviation activity and arrivals that are less than 1 million. Then we have, from the study, 20 states known to have a very low level of compliance. Now, I believe this is where we should, our concern and our focus would be within the executive agency. Because within the 20 states that are known for a very low level of compliance, we have states with the most busiest airports in terms of traffic, passenger arrivals, and passenger movements. Right. We have, for example, Johannesburg. It moves in 2018 alone 21.2 million. Cairo, 15 million. Addis Ababa, 12.1 million. Cape Town, 10.8 million. Casablanca, as you rightfully earlier stated, that numbers don't lie. Cape Town, 10.8 million. Casablanca, 9.7. I will later on state the morale behind me enumerating the numbers. We have...
Ms. Simana, I'm going to be rude. Sorry to interrupt you there. Your sound is not coming across very clearly at this moment. So if we could leave it at this juncture, because you're not coming across well technically. But I think we've understood how much money is being made from air travel and the new hubs that are emerging from Addis Ababa to Cape Town, even Casablanca in Morocco. So there's a lot of work that's taking place on the African continent. I think we'll stay with the theme of getting people moving and traveling. Hani Abdul Kawi, Head of Travel Sales for International Growth at Google Global. I'd like you to add your voice and also answer this question from Ziad Haoumi. Ziad says, isn't it time to review the cost structure of air travel and find a better way to make travel more attractive? And I think one of the ways young people find it easier to travel is if they can do everything online, if they can book the air ticket, the hotel, the Airbnb, move their foreign exchange for the next destination. If they can do all of that digitally, it would make it so much more attractive, certainly for the millennials and those younger.
Thank you very much, Lerato. Allow me to probably just say a quick note. So, Your Excellencies and distinguished guests, thanks for having me. I truly miss being in person with all of you and enjoy a true, authentic cup of coffee in one of my favorite, Addis Ababa cafes. It's a very interesting dynamic at the moment as the whole travel went into a full reset over the last couple of years. We really didn't need COVID to remind us about the contribution of tourism to the GDP, but as the whole world is trying to recover and reconstruct, allow me to probably share with you a couple of comments first. As you as governments and business leaders are trying to solve Africa's deficit in infrastructure when it comes to the mobility. So think of three matters exactly. So prior to the COVID, the challenge, the travel and tourism industry provided a total economic impact of around $9 trillion. And if we put this as a country, it would be the third largest GDP country in the world, right after the US and China. The second point, as Dr. Vera Songwei said, and Dr. Amani Abu Zaid also iterated early, 1 in every 10 jobs in the world is supported by the travel and tourism sector. So think of all those local small and medium businesses, taxi drivers, tourism workers here and there, and even the infrastructures that support and all the related associated industries behind it. The whole commerce and the whole even e-commerce is dependent about the global mobility in definitely one of that. So as leaders, it's very critical for all of you in the government to help fight against unemployment rates and creating even more GDP income and improving, importantly, the prosperities of your own people. And thirdly, travel is the biggest export business we can ever think of. So if you're selling a few products or coffee or t-shirts, there are always logistics about how do you do setup for success. But travel, people truly want to come to you, and the whole world is your market. So the potential is truly there, and the whole idea is how can we maximize and get as many input as possible and improve the returns on the significant investments that you are discussing today, and obviously discussing challenges of funding. But the execution is equally important as the planning to maximize those chances. If I summarize those 3 points before I jump to that particular question, is I can say that travel is no longer a luxury. It's rather a human necessity. So I'm very optimistic about the whole rebound coming our way. So when it comes to the psychographics behavior of how people are trying to now travel and the whole millennium and the whole costing behind the travel industry, it's always a challenging, because on one side, like the travel suppliers are always tied to significant cost infrastructure behind the operations that they are trying to offer. For the fuel prices, for example, there is nothing to do about it but to pray. And unfortunately, it's very high at the moment. For things such as like the taxes and like the in-country kind of taxes, and we've listened this morning about like moving from Western Africa to Eastern Africa, and as the CEO of Kenya Airways was talking, it's very costly surcharge that might even add 30% of the cost alone into that. So when it comes to the actual like users, as we are trying to probably analyze and see the potential here, taking a travel purchase decision, especially for young people and in general even population globally, it proved to be a very stressful moment. And sometimes people take a lot of time to decide whether to buy this air ticket or not. They almost know they want to go from A to B for a specific reason at a specific time, whether it's luxury kind of travel or even meeting family and friends or diaspora coming back into their home countries and so on. But they always have this fear, if we compare it, for example, about like buying long-term goods in their homes, of like buying a sofa or even financial bonds or stocks to invest in. The reason is travel is always having this complexity of, did I get the right value for money, right? So it wasn't actually about it cheaper, that this is the only one thing that they want to index. It's actually about the full like value for money. And we are seeing a lot of people are now taking more and more independent decisions. So they are no longer influenced by like a major media stream saying like, I am the best airlines or I am the best hotel kind of chain. It's rather they go and validate the information and try to seek for themselves what is truly resonating as the best value when it comes to that. If I may probably add a quick additional note about what we see for demand for Africa. We are seeing it's an amazing green field for Africa when it comes to specifically to inbound tourism. So obviously clearing the path with things such as Agenda 2063 and the whole work about like CFTA is playing a pivotal role that inspires like a significant change by harmonizing the whole regulation around it, the whole infrastructure around it in order to support. And air for sure would play a significant role, but the whole panorama of life is connected. We might come by air, but people want to enter connectivity within Africa, maybe by a rail or some like simple buses or even like simplified like visa processing at the checkpoints at the border controls in general, whether it's sea or land and so on. So just to give you like probably what I just saw over the last 3 months alone, there is a huge user demand for the air travel to Africa. And to my surprise, it was actually at the same level of 2019. I'm speaking about people who come to Google and search for flights to places in Africa. It's exactly at the same level of 2019. With very prominent destinations such as Cape Town, Cairo, Lagos, Nairobi, Dakar, Casablanca, and lots of this demand might even come from France, from UK and the US. However, the actual tourist arrivals in country is still far behind and it's not matching, which is I see it as a challenge and an opportunity for all like the African leaders, that we need to listen to those kind of signals coming along and try to act now in order to maximize like the returns for promoting travel GDP.
So this is fantastic. So we're seeing international visitors wanting to have an experience of Africa. They're coming. What we really need to stimulate is domestic travel. And now finally, I'd like to introduce our last speaker on this panel. And I kept you last, not because you're least, but actually because everything we are discussing here today concerns the work that you do, Ms. Beatrice Cheto, from the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, all the funding around the tourism and hospitality sector, the funding of core infrastructure that will stimulate the transport economy, the warehousing, the airports, the rail, the roads, the things that will facilitate the movement of goods and commuters from one African market to the next. It's all about you. So after the things you've heard, what are your reflections? What can you tell us about the milestones that the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat are working towards? And also answer, please, some of the questions that have been raised about the need for harmonization and standardization of regulations, of payment systems, of border controls, and just general legalities.
Thank you very much, Lerato. And I'd like to just start by thanking the UNECA for this very important session. I'd also like to say that my Director of Trade and Services, Miss Emily Mburu Doria, sends her regrets for not being able to participate in the session physically, and she sends her best wishes for a very stimulating and fruitful discussion. So I should say that this is a very, very important discussion on a very crucial topic. And as we all know, the AFCFTA sits as a kind of central plank in this discussion, because we have to remember the context in which this AFCFTA should be viewed. The market of 1.2 billion people, 2.6 trillion in GDP, will rise to 16 trillion GDP and 2.75 billion people by 2060. This market is becoming steadily middle class, it's young, it's increasingly educated, and by 2050 it will account for more than a quarter of the world's working population. And what it does is seek to expand intra-Africa trade. It's an important catalyst for growth. One of the most important things to remember is that it promotes certainty. We talked about, other people have talked about the rules and the frameworks around which aviation and other transport areas are going to be designed and developed. Well, it is through this market environment, the creation of this market environment that promotes certainty, that promotes predictability and transparency, and then secondly leads to reduced trade and transaction costs, that all these transport infrastructure will be developed. The other core focus of the AFCFTA is industrialization and development of regional value chains. So we heard other speakers talking about linkages. So where the AFCFTA seeks to create regional value chains for increased trade in manufacturers, for agribusiness, that means that there will be tremendous growth in economic activities and job creation. There will be increase in trade in services, which is where I work, associated with that industrialization. And I should just signal that under the AFCFTA, we are continuing, as the AFCFTA Secretariat, we are continuing to assist state and non-state parties in the negotiations that will lead to progressive liberalization in trade and services in all service sectors. But we have started in the current round with business, communication, financial, tourism, and transport services. Now, I liked what another colleague on the panel was saying about the ecosystem for aviation and for transport, the development of the transport sector. We know already that intra-Africa trade has already been constrained by the state of transport infrastructure. So roads, which are the main port, carrying at least 80% of goods, 90% of passengers, yet we have 53% of roads are unpaved. This isolates people from basic education, health services, transport corridors, trade hubs, and economic opportunities. Similarly, although Africa has 1/6 of the world's population, it accounts for only 4% of globalized containerized shipping volumes. This is mainly due to insufficient port capacity. Africa only has about 64 ports, many of them poorly equipped, uneconomically operated. So this causes delays, long processing times, poor shipment handling rates. And these costs can reach about 50% more in Africa than in other parts of the world. Air transport in Africa remains expensive by international standards. This is mainly because of lower passenger traffic, limited liberalization of the airspace, despite the launch of the single African air transport market, and of course, because the negotiations are still ongoing on liberalizing services in this area. You've got high passenger and airport taxes. If we consider that African airlines used to have a share of global air transport market hovering around 2 to 3% between 1980 and 2019, we see that the market has really not developed. In the 1980s, African air carriers had 45% share of the African aviation market versus 55% operated by foreign carriers. But in 2019, the proportion of African carriers' share of the African market had fallen to 20%, with 80% of Africa's air transport market now operated by foreign carriers. So in effect, foreign airlines now serve 8 out of 10 of Africa's most lucrative routes. And then, of course, we know the COVID-19 pandemic has negatively impacted the operations of all actors along the air transport supply chain. But the central point, I think, of this discussion is that where the challenges are, there are opportunities in disguise. All of these inadequacies and problems are merely the starting point from which Africa seeks to trade with itself. So these opportunities, these challenges can provide significant opportunities for investment. These investments can lead to improvements in air traffic systems, fleet modernization, port security, streamlined cargo handling procedures, implementation of one-stop border posts, development of inland container depots, improved intermodal handling throughout Africa's trade corridors. And this infrastructure is urgently required to unlock Africa's trade potential under the AFCFTA. And this is why it is very helpful, and in fact, it's quite essential, that transport and logistics and tourism are being negotiated in the current round of services negotiation. So specific commitments in transport services, in all the services that I mentioned, business services, where, for instance, warehousing sits, professional services sits also under business services. This will go a long way to address infrastructure bottlenecks among African countries. And then when those specific commitments are then coupled with regulatory frameworks, as it's provided for under the Protocol on Trade and Services, that will ensure synergy, it will ensure harmonization, it will ensure cooperation across the continent, and then this further helps to support trade expansion. It leads to reduction of transaction costs, as well as increased investment. And so transport and logistics are crucial parts of the regional value chains. I beg your pardon?
Ma'am, I'd like to thank you for your interventions. I think we get the broad picture that the work that's being done now, the research that's being conducted by the UNECA into the different areas of investment for the transport economy is very much streamlined with the agenda at the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat in Ghana, the work you're doing right now on harmonization, standardization, and also around finding synergies within transport and tourism and services. It's very much the issue that's on the table. In the interest of time, I'd like to say thank you very much to our panelists. His Excellency Albert Muchanga, the Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining at the African Union, for setting the stage for us, setting the tone. I'd also like to thank Abdurrahman Bert from the African Airlines Association, Yassine Fall, the Acting Vice President at the African Development Bank, Selim Bora, the Chairman of the Suma International Construction Group, Angeline Semana, the Interim Secretary General of the African Civil Aviation Commission, yourself, Madam Beatrice Cheto from the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, Hani Abdel Kawi from Google Global, and Ato Jassi representing the Africa Finance Corporation, and then finally representing the Director General of the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, Tepalaya Kabata. Thank you very much for your time. We have just one short session left, and that's just the policy direction or the way forward. And that's very much speaking to the research that has informed today's conversation, the numbers we have spoken to you about, the fact that the transport and tourism and logistics sector collectively account for $160 billion in the African continent, that we can see visitor numbers in tourism jump from 76 million to 303 million in the next 10 years, and that we can see an addition to GDP of 7% when we get these investments right. So without further ado, please allow me to welcome Stephen Karingi, the Director for Regional Integration and Trade here at ECA, Robert Lesinge, who is the Chief for Energy and Infrastructure Services here at the ECA, and also Jeffrey Manyara from the ECA. And then a brief word will be given to us just to really crystallize our thinking around tourism, a brief word virtually from Walter Mzembe, who's the chairman of the World Tourism Network. He will have the last say, and then we will close the session and break for lunch, which has generously been offered by the UNECA. So, Robert and Stephen, thank you very much for your time. Just the highlights of the research that you've conducted, the numbers that matter and must convince and can convince the business community that transport is the next big thing, and this is where the bankable projects and the rates of return are to be found. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lerato. So, Excellencies, and especially those who are representing our heads of state who are still with us, and all the CEOs, captains of industries that are still with us, and our participants virtually. We've had a lot of engagement virtually, Lerato, by the way, answering a lot of the questions. So, and I've been warned that we are going to compress this session. So let me take only 2 minutes to put things in context before I give the floor to Robert. So if you go to the first slide, to the next slide on this, is to say that, as you know, as you heard from Beatrice, from the AFCFTA Secretariat, a lot of work has been done in the context of the AFCFTA. We all know the implications of the AFCFTA in terms of the catalyzation of intra-African trade. In fact, the work that we have done here at the ECA, we know what is going to happen in terms of intra-African trade growth in services, in goods, and in the area of services where we are focusing on today. We know that most of the growth in the area of intra-African trade in services is actually going to happen in tourism and trade. So essentially the next question we ask ourselves is, how do you translate this into jobs and into investments? And the study that Robert is going to give is to show how the growth in trade in services in those two specific sectors will actually be the platform through which we can actually unlock additional investments in the continent and jobs, because we know the exact corridors where these things are going to happen, where you need extra kilometers of road, where you need new rail track. And so what Robert will be giving us is actually details about that. And so that at least he gives you more insights into this, let me pass the floor now to Robert.
Thank you, Stephen. I think this is very exciting. It has taken us a lot of months to undertake this study, and so we're quite pleased to present the results. Very briefly, I would like to say what we did, how did we do it, and what did we find out. What we did was to ask ourselves, what is the implications of the continental free trade area for the demand of transport infrastructure and services? So basically, what does this mean for roads, rail, airport, railways? What does this mean in terms of the number of trucks, train wagons, airplanes, and vessels, and so on? Now, how did we do it? Pretty technical work. We started by doing a trade model, the gravity model, to see bilateral trade flows between African countries. Once we knew that, we then went on to do transport model. What transport modes would be used to move the trade between the different origin and destination pairs that we identified from the trade model. Once we knew the transport modes that would be used, the quantity, we were then able to quantify the freight for roads, for rail, for air, for ship. And once we knew that, we could calculate the number of trucks, the number of rail wagons, the number of airplanes, the number of vessels. And once we knew that, and we know the unit cost of different trucks, aircraft, we could put numbers on what we are looking at. So what did we find out? For roads, and I can see some charts on the screen, which is very small. We look at the baseline of 2019, we look at the horizon of 2030, and we look at a number of scenarios. The first scenario is what happens if we implement the continental free trade area by 2030. What happens if we implement the continental free trade area plus regional infrastructure projects that we have on the continent? And we have some very interesting results. I think today, the road is the lion's share of freight on the continent, 77%. But if we do implement the continental free trade area, this will fall to about 69% or so. But the most interesting findings we are having is that the railway today carries just 0.3% of freight on the continent. If we implement the continental free trade area, this will move to 6.8%. And this has implications for investment in railways. What we found for air transport, for instance, is that today the share is about 1%. In 2030, that share will not change. But the most important statistics is that the volume carried by air will double from 2.5 million tons to 4.5 million tons. And what does that mean? We need a lot more aircraft to carry this increased goods by air. So basically, we also ask ourselves, what infrastructure needs upgrading? Because we find out that there are certain links that we see a substantial increase in flow of freight. And those links, we believe, will not be able to accommodate the increase in freight. And so they need upgrading. And for roads, we identify over 600,000 kilometers of roads that need upgrading. For railways, we identify more than 87,000 kilometers of railways that will need upgrading. And we can begin to put figures into this, because we know that we need about $0.5 million to $1.5 million to upgrade a kilometer of road. And if we do that mathematics, we're able to say that we need between 25 to 60 billion dollars to upgrade our road. the increase in goods as a result of the continental free trade area. I don't know how much time I do have, but we also have a very good sense of where, in terms of sub-regions of the continent, we are seeing increased traffic, and this can also guide investment decisions. For instance, for roads, we see a lot of movements within West Africa. About 39% of the trucks that we will require will be operating within West Africa. We also see a lot of movements between West and Southern Africa. For railways, we see a lot of movement within West Africa. We see a lot of movement within Southern Africa and Northern Africa as well. And I just want to begin to jump into some policy recommendations here and way forward. What we have seen is that the African continental free trade area cannot be implemented in isolation. It has to be implemented hand with regional infrastructure projects, a program for infrastructure development in Africa. I think the good thing is that we have 69 priority projects of the PIDA. We know that it will cost $160 billion to implement the PIDA projects, which is a huge opportunity for investors. Number two is the strategies, national strategies for the African continental free trade area. I think the point we want to make is the national strategies must take into consideration infrastructure development. The good news is that our study has taken a deep dive to all African countries. So we do know for each country on the continent how many kilometers of roads have to be upgraded, how many kilometers of railways have to be upgraded, how many trucks, how many airplanes, and so on, the countries need to be able to meet the requirements of the African continental free trade area. So the ECA, we are there to support countries to mainstream infrastructure requirement into the African continental free trade area national strategy. And let me just end with these figures in terms of what we need. And I think the Executive Secretary mentioned some of them. In terms of the equipment requirement, we have calculated that we need about $340 billion to invest in trucks to carry the increase in freight on the continent. We need $25 billion to invest in aircraft. We need $36 billion to invest in freight wagon for train. And we need about $4 billion to invest in vessels. So I just want to leave it there with those numbers. And altogether, that's about $411 billion worth of investment that is waiting for people who want to tap. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the authors of our research, talking us through the key highlights. 400+ billion is not a number to be scoffed at across the value chain, shared out, creating jobs. I think your research also says as a percentage of economic output, 7%, that's a lot of busy people that can participate in the economies across the African continent. So thank you very much for sharing with us the core elements of this research that inform our discussions here today. Finally, we have a comment from Walter Mzembe, who's the chairman of the World Tourism Network for Africa, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Tourism in Zimbabwe, coming to us virtually. Could I get a signal whether he is online, lined up to talk to us? Just to remind us why we should always consider the transport economy as a synergy and a symbiosis with tourism. The two are interdependent. You can't have one without the other. It's a point we've been stressing throughout the course of the day. It doesn't seem like we have, we do have Dr. Walter Mzembe. Okay, please, over to you, sir. The virtual floor is yours. If you could just talk us through tourism, transport, and the future economy of Africa.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to make an intervention in this very important forum that has been long overdue in terms of highlighting the significance of travel and tourism going forward, and obviously enabled by the transport cluster as given in the theme. But suffice to say that I wish to share with delegates that the potential of travel and tourism is signified by its exponential growth over the last 65 years or so. In 1950, there were just 2 million international arrivals in the world. And on the back of the aviation revolution, the global market has grown exponentially, at least up to 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic, to 1.47 billion arrivals. And therefore, I'm yet to see any sector which can challenge the bullish growth of travel and tourism. No wonder it doesn't surprise, therefore, that even the United Nations World Economic Situation Prospects 2022 report actually still situates travel and tourism as the third fastest growing sector, third only after fuels and chemicals, and displacing food to the fourth place in terms of its export contributions, and also in terms of its catalytic aspects to revive the global economies. It is a sector in 2019, just before the advent of COVID, that registered 1.8 trillion in terms of export proceeds. But the fundamental question that I want to pose before this esteemed gathering is, why are we still participating in this huge potential as Africa, only to the extent of 5% for as long as I can remember? So 55 African destinations are sharing only a mere 5% of this huge potential and this huge performance. And the answers really as to why it is happening lie in so much of the contributions that have been made today. We are not short of good papers, good workshops, and good resolutions regarding tourism and travel. I think we are missing in action on implementation. For as long as I was Minister of Tourism, for the decade that I was, we were never short of sound policy resolutions at the United Nations, the World Tourism Organization, or within the African Union itself. Some of the speakers who have spoken, very familiar faces, but we come and repeat the same testaments year after year, and absolutely nothing happens by way of implementation. So I would basically say to you, I will table my contribution with the accredited media to this forum, and also with UNECA, who have done an excellent job of gathering us, basically to refresh memory on some of the contributions that we made when we were in-service ministers. In fact, as far as 2016, when I made a comprehensive contribution to the Executive Council when it met in Mekelle in Ethiopia, specifically to highlight why tourism and why travel and tourism. But I will leave you with 4 points that I think are fundamental in terms of policy direction going forward. The first one is we need to bring back the Brand Africa project into perspective. We need to work around that. And the issue that is really making it imperative is that Africa is treated as one contiguous destination, when in fact it is a conglomeration of 55 different brands that speak in dissonance, that don't speak to the same thing. And we need basically to situate Brand Africa at the African Union and make it an imperative project that is contributed to by all the 55 national economies. The next thing that I wish really to highlight is the openness project. Anything policy perspective that speaks to the idea of opening up Africa, we should chase. And this includes visa openness. This includes opening up our destination in terms of accessibility and connectivity. Many of the issues that have been spoken to and spoken about in previous sessions. The obsession with national governments on wanting to own and host national airlines, even when the economics on the ground really attests to the opposite, that we cannot all host national airlines. And therefore, we need to work on consolidations, we need to work on route sharing, we need to support the regional airlines that are already doing very well. But those without national airlines, and there was a classic example that was given by the president of Sierra Leone, that without even a national airline, you can have the entire globe in your palm, just by making sure that you open your skies, air service agreements are in place, the infrastructure is in place. You can support the arrival of many global airlines into your destination without bleeding or hemorrhaging fiscus to support unviable projects like national airlines for many of our countries. The issue around institutionalization of tourism in the African Union is fundamental. I'm happy that a former colleague is now heading tourism coupled to many other elements inside the African Union. But that's not enough. You need to go a step further and actually conceive and consummate an African tourism organization, because many of these resolutions that we make here and that we make elsewhere, that are made elsewhere under the United Nations World Tourism Organization, do not find fertile ground for implementation at the African continental level. And therefore, we will need to make sure that we resuscitate a project that we started way back, and I think it froze around 2019, of the consummation of an African or Africa Travel or Tourism Organization with an imperative membership of all the 55 countries, but basically assist with the core business of making sure that all the enablers and facilitators of tourism are in action and they're seeking consonant all together. But the last point that I wish to make around policy, police code, is the aspect of connectivity. It is the game changer. It is really the revolution of our time. And we must understand that God speaks to us sometimes through force. The flip side of what has happened with the COVID pandemic is that we've been leapfrogged into the 4IR revolutionary stage by way of the pandemic itself. And what we were 2 years ago is completely different from where we are now, and we are not going back to 2 years ago. And 4IR, if it was coming in 2 decades, it is coming in 5 years. And this is why even platforms like Facebook are now called Meta, because we're in the metaverse age. But it will never substitute the physical experience, the physical visit. It will never substitute tourism facilitation in the physical, but it is here with us. And therefore, we need to work around our policies that are grouped under just one keyword, connectivity, and it is the revolution of our time. But I will end here because I know that we are the last speakers and we have to rush to the next sessions. I will table my paper with you. It's quite comprehensive, and it will speak to many of the aspects that have been dealt with today. Thank you for the opportunity to engage you.
And we thank you, Walter Mzembe, Chairman of the World Tourism Network, for just raising some salient points, reminding us what matters. And I think ultimately, reiterating the point, we know what needs to be done to accelerate Agenda 2063, development on the African continent, and which sectors of the economy to tap into. We know it. The research is there. It's done. It's thorough. It's credible. The issue now is just to get it done. And I hope that from the conversations you heard here today, you can see that there's incredible potential in investing in different aspects of what we call the transport and tourism economy, the different transport modalities from rail to shipping, a lot of emphasis on air and cargo because of how it relates to travel and tourism, but certainly fixing the infrastructure at ports for the railway lines and for the roads through which a lot of goods still move across the African continent. Because if we can get all of those aspects right, we're talking about building an industry that's currently worth 160 billion to what we heard, almost $500 billion. and in it, so many jobs to be created. And we were reminded that ultimately, that's why this work is being done, for the jobs and for the opportunities that it creates for all Africans, but in particular for women who are these traders moving across borders, and young Africans who'll be migrating from country to country, if not for a tourism cultural experience, but for an experience as labor, to go and work somewhere, hone in and carve out new skills. This has been the 5th African Business Forum, brought to you by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Google Global and Google Africa in particular, and also Africa 24. We want to thank all those who've collaborated with us, including at the highest level at the African Union Commission, and also across other development finance institutions such as Afrexim Bank, the African Development Bank, and many of those that participated. May I also thank our distinguished leaders who were here, the President of Sierra Leone, the President of Botswana, and of course, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Gambia, who's still here with us. We thank you very much for your time, Your Excellency Tangara. As I adjourn the session for today, may I remind all our delegates who are physically with us here in the auditorium in Addis Ababa that lunch will be served in the banqueting hall, lunch courtesy of the UNECA. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your questions. And go out there and make Africa shine, because here it's all about the ideas for a prosperous Africa. My name is Lerato Mbele. Bye-bye.